Chapter 2054 Palace Master Du's Ritual. As he spoke, black smoke was flowing out from the clone's wounds. Just like before, his body was automatically expelling the air of degeneration that had seeped into his wounds. What a pity that such wounds don't last too long on my body. I don't think that I'll be able to determine the concentration gradient of the air of degeneration for you at this rate. Ah! With a cry of agony, the clone lowered his head, only to see Zhongxian's sword lodged in another part of his body. You don't need to worry about that. It'll be tiring, but I'm willing to take up the responsibility of ensuring that there are plenty of wounds on your body so that you can get the job done, Zhongxian said with a smile. With veins bulging at his temples, the clone felt tempted to smash Zhongxian's head in. With a helpless sigh, he dragged his wounded body around the area to test the concentration gradient of the air of degeneration. Just as Zhongxian had guessed, there was indeed a visible difference in the concentration of the air of degeneration in the area. It did not take the clone too long to find the region where the concentration of air of degeneration was the highest. What was surprising was that it was located in a region that had very little rubble but plenty of plants. Thick vines could be seen creeping up the walls and covering the roofs. Having narrowed down the location, Zhongxian heaved a sigh of relief. He quickly scanned his surroundings for a moment before bringing out over 100 formation flags with a flick of his hand. With a tap of his finger, all the formation flags flew out and planted themselves in the surroundings, forming a wind wall. After this was done, Zhongxian flew up into the sky and shouted, "Palace Master Du, I am Liu Yang, the head of the 7-star pavilion. I don't have any ties with the Hall of Gods or the Ethereal Hall. I know that you are somewhere below, and I implore you to show yourself so that I can treat you. Otherwise, you won't even last an incense's time, under the corrosion of the air of degeneration. If I'm not wrong, your innards and meridians are already starting to collapse under the corrosion, such that even breathing isn't easy for you. With the severity of the copper-masked lady's injuries, she would find it hard to survive even outside, let alone in the city of collapsed space. Once the air of degeneration seeped into her wounds, it would slowly corrode her innards as well, destroying her vitals. If her condition persisted, she would not last too long even if she was a semi-divinity realm expert. Hong Long. The vines suddenly exploded, and the copper-masked lady flew out from within. Her body was trembling non-stop due to the excruciating pain. However, her body still remained upright despite her current condition, and she was staring at Zhongxian warily, seemingly still unwilling to trust him. She was afraid that this young man was yet another card prepared by the Hall of Gods in order to lure her out. Most likely, this young man should have already noticed that the altar she had left behind was a fake. The warriors from the Hall of Gods were beings devoid of feelings. To them, there was nothing more important than accomplishing the missions that they were tasked with. She knew just how valuable the altar was, and it would not surprise her if the Hall of Gods was willing to sacrifice a few semi-divinity realm experts in order to acquire it. Besides, even though it appeared that the young man had killed those two, who could say for sure that it was not just another illusion to trick her? As such, she was unwilling to trust the young man before her. She could not allow Starchaser Palace to fall to ruin due to her misjudgment. I have already hidden the altar in the depths of the city of collapsed space. None of you will be able to find it, so there's no need to keep up with the pretense. If you wish to kill me, I suggest you get it over and done with. You won't be getting anything out of me, the copper-masked lady scoffed. You are really misunderstanding my intentions, Zhongxian said with a sigh. He flicked a jade bottle over and halted it right before her. Drink the recovery medicine inside here. Otherwise, even if I don't make a move, there's no way you'll get out of here alive. The copper-masked lady scanned her surroundings and confirmed that there was no way she would be able to escape quickly. Seeing that there was no way around this, she reluctantly took the jade bottle and drank it. The young man was right. Her innards had been corroded by the air of degeneration, and her energy had nearly dried up. The severity of her injuries was much worse than those of Elder Bai Yi back then. If not for the fact that she had reached the semi-divinity realm, she would have already died. Any escape routes had been sealed by the formation set up in the area. Regardless of whether what was in the jade bottle was poison or an antidote, it made no difference to her. At the very most, She would just explode her cultivation and bring the young man down with her. After drinking the jade bottle, her face suddenly began twitching. A moment later, she spurted a mouthful of blood. However, the blood was not red in color but pitch black. As it landed on the ground, black smoke swiftly evaporated from it and dissipated into the surroundings. This. The copper-masked lady widened her eyes in incredulity. She knew about the situation in the city of collapsed space very well, and it was for that reason that she had set up the formation involving the inner demon's flowers in advance to whittle down the forces of the Hall of Gods. For many years, everyone had believed that one's fate was sealed once the air of degeneration seeped into one's body. Yet, she was cured just by drinking a bottle of water. "Who are you?" the copper-masked lady asked with narrowed eyes. It was impossible for those from the Hall of Gods to be so kind as to treat her of her affliction. Besides, she had never heard of the Hall of Gods possessing the means to expel the air of degeneration from one's body. The very fact that several warriors of the Hall of Gods had died here in the past proved that. Given so, it was highly likely that the young man really was not in cahoots with Fu Chunzi and the others. "I told you earlier. I am Liu Yang, the new head of the Seven-Star Pavilion. I have come here in search of you not to find the altar but to inquire about some personal matters." Zhong Xian clasped his fist. "You wish to inquire about some personal matters?" "Indeed. I heard that Palace Master Du conducted a ritual above the vacant sea to summon a god. May I know if that god was Luo Ruoxin?" Zhong Xian asked nervously. However, the copper-masked lady simply looked at him quietly with a frown. Sensing some wariness from the other party, Zhong Xian pulled out the crimson pendant and said, "You should recognize this artifact, right?" Considering how Shark One and the others were able to recognize this pendant despite having only seen it once, as the one who had summoned Luo Ruoxin down to the Azure, Du Qingyuan should be very familiar with it. "This is a possession of the spirit god." The copper-masked lady's eyes widened as she staggered backward a little. With an incredulous look on her face, she asked, "Could it be that you are sect leader Zhong Xian?" "Indeed." Zhong Xian nodded as he quickly cancelled the effects of the disguise amulet to revert to his original appearance. The copper-masked lady quickly kneeled down and greeted, "Elder Jiang Yaro of Starchaser Palace pays respects to sect leader Zhong." "Jiang Yaro?" Zhong Xian frowned. The copper-masked lady took off her copper mask and revealed the appearance of a middle-aged lady. With her gaze lowered deferentially, she explained, "We received intelligence that the Hall of Gods intended to snatch the altar, so our palace master instructed me to disguise myself as her. I would come to the city of collapsed space and find a way to kill them while she hid the altar at a discreet location." This. Zhong Xian blinked. It seemed that Du Qingyuan was an extremely meticulous person. Considering that she was up against the Hall of Gods, it was only right for her to go this far. And her efforts had paid off. It was clear that she was the victor in the war of wits after all that had happened. Most likely, she might have guessed that First Elder Zhao Yu and the others would not be able to keep silent about the matter for too long, so she had intentionally leaked fake news to them so as to lure those from the Hall of Gods over to the city of collapsed space. This would buy Du Qingyuan more than enough time to complete her ritual. "But your cultivation realm?" Zhong Xian remarked questioningly with a frown. Based on what he knew, Starchaser Palace should not have any semi-divinity realm experts other than Du Qingyuan. After all, the only way they could advance their cultivation to the realm was through the Centennial Azure Bridge. So, how could the other party possibly have reached the semi-divinity realm as well? "It's the god blood," Jiang Yaro explained. Zhong Xian widened his eyes in realization. Even a few droplets of blood from the god was enough for the blackback tortoise and the 3 sharks to make the final step forward. As the person who had summoned the god, Du Qingyuan should have been able to acquire quite a few droplets of god blood. With that, it would not be too much of a surprise for some semi-divinity realm experts to appear in the ranks of Starchaser Palace. However, as such an occurrence would shake the balance of power among the 6 sects, Starchaser Palace had chosen to hide this matter. Most likely, the reason Jiang Yaro had been chosen to consume the god blood was because she was a close confidant of Du Qingyuan, similar to what Elder Feng was to Kuei Xiao. After confirming that Jiang Yaro knew nothing about Luo Ruoxin at all, Zhong Xian asked with a frown, May I know where Palace Master Du is at the moment? Our Palace Master instructed me that to treat you with the utmost respect and fulfill all of your requests unconditionally, sect leader Zhong. However, I'm afraid that I don't really know, Jiang Yaro said with a bitter smile. Sect leader Zhong? Zhong Xian frowned. He was slightly perplexed by the address. It was true that he was the Hall Master of the Myriad Beasts Hall and the Pavilion Master of the Seven-Star Pavilion, but sect leader? Where did that title come from? Yes. Jiang Yaro was slightly surprised to see that Zhong Xian was confused by her manner of address. You are the sect leader of the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion. The entire continent was aware of this matter, so it was not possible that the person in question was unaware of the matter, right? Zhong Xian's lower jaw slackened, and his mouth remained agape for a long while. Then, he sighed deeply and said, let's put that aside for the moment and leave the city of collapsed space. I'll need you to help me contact Palace Master Du and inform her that I am looking for her. I believe that I should be able to help her deal with the threat coming from the Hall of Gods. Knowing that the young man before her wielded great authority in his hands, Jiang Yaro hurriedly nodded. All right. Thus, Jiang Yaro quickly led Zhong Xian toward the exit. The city of collapsed space was a sinister region filled with all sorts of menace, but Jiang Yaro was familiar with the terrain, and Zhong Xian was able to spot threats from a distance with his eye of insight. This allowed them to circumvent most danger along the way. Even if they were unlucky enough to encounter some danger along the way, they were strong enough to get past them without sustaining any injuries. Just like that, they were able to successfully return to the desert after an hour of travel. Tension finally escaped from Jiang Yaro's body as she finally stepped out of the city of collapsed space. She turned to Zhong Xian and said, I'll try to get in touch with our Palace Master. She had been prepared to lose her life in that dark, eerie place, so when she felt the warmth of the sun embracing her body once more, she felt like she had just been born anew. Taking out her communication jade token, she quickly set up a formation in order to extend the device's range. A moment later, she said, I have already sent a message to our Palace Master. Let's return to Starchaser Palace for now. Our Palace Master will head there as well once she receives my message. Yuan Zhong Xian nodded. Riding on Shark 1, the two of them quickly headed back to the Sea of Exiled Stars. In a distant spacetime, the head of Starchaser Palace, Du Qingyuan, was standing in front of an altar, muttering softly beneath her breath. In response to her mutterings, the altar was emanating a divine aura, causing the flames on top to blaze furiously. Who? Sometime later, an illusory figure gradually materialized atop the altar. Priestess, state your affair. The voice of the figure was distinct yet distant, almost as if it had traveled across dimensions in order to reach here. I wish to meet the spirit god. Du Qingyuan kneeled to the floor. The spirit god has already departed, the figure replied. Du Qingyuan was silent for a moment before she spoke once more. There is something that I would like to report. The Hall of Gods has made a move against the 6 sects, and the timing for the descent of the Azure Bridge has been arbitrarily changed. I suspect that something might have happened with the Hall of Gods. The figure frowned. Do you know of the reasons behind those changes? I do have a conjecture in mind, but I'm not too sure about its veracity, Du Qingyuan replied. To be able to incite the Hall of Gods to interfere with secular affairs and attempt to snatch the altar, I suspect that it has something to do with. Boom. Before she could finish her words, the spacetime behind her suddenly distorted, and yet another person appeared within this dimensional plane. Pa. With a light flick of his hand, the figure atop the altar dissipated into fleeting mist. The person walked straight toward the altar to grab it, and in retaliation, the altar released a powerful burst of energy. However, the person dispelled the burst of energy with a flick of his finger. Just like that, the altar fell into his hands. Seeing how neither the god nor the altar was able to stop the person, Du Qingyuan's eyes narrowed in utter astonishment. She was just about to make a move when the other party suddenly turned to look at her with a faint smile on his lips. Palace Master Du, we meet once again. As I thought, it's really you. Du Qingyuan felt as if her heart had been plunged into the depths of an icy river. An incense's time is roughly 15 minutes. Chapter 2055 Catalysts for a Breakthrough. It took half a day for Zhongxian and Jiang Yaro to return to Starchaser Palace. First Elder Zhao Yu widened her eyes in disbelief upon seeing Jiang Yaro. She had thought that their previous parting would be eternal, but the latter had managed to return alive. It's all thanks to sect leader Zhongxian's help, Jiang Yaro explained. Sect leader Zhongxian? Are you referring to the new head of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion? First Elder Zhao Yu was stunned. Jiang Yaro nodded before asking, is our palace master back yet? First Elder Zhao Yu shook her head. That's weird. I sent a message to our palace master after I was safe, so she should have returned right after receiving my message. Why isn't she here yet? She did not know exactly where Du Qingyuan had headed to, but it should not be as far off as the city of collapsed space, so she should have been able to return ahead of them. Let's just wait a bit more. Our palace master might have been held up by something else. Given her strength, it's unlikely that anything bad will have happened to her, First Elder Zhao Yu replied. Yuan Jiang Yaro nodded. She settled Zhongxian down in one of the accommodations before pacing around the main hall, waiting for Du Qingyuan to return. However, even after half a day, Du Qingyuan was nowhere to be seen. This caused the two elders to start to panic. Let's head to the ritual palace and try to get in contact with our palace master through a ritual, Jiang Yaro said with a frown. They had been with Du Qingyuan for over 1,000 years, and they knew the latter's temperament very well. The latter should have rushed over as soon as she received the news. She was not the type to allow anything else to hold her up when it came to urgent business. Yet, she was not even responding to their messages. Could she have met with some kind of danger? Worried sick, Jiang Yaro and First Elder Zhao Yu headed to Zhongxian's accommodation to urge him to come along with them before rushing to the ritual palace. In the massive room, an altar similar to the one that Zhongxian had seen back in the city of collapsed space stood at the very center. The two elders of Starchaser Palace quickly placed several offerings on the altar, and a moment later, a sky-blue flame seedling suddenly appeared on it. It was a known fact that the altars of Starchaser Palace could even cross dimensions to establish a connection link with the gods, so reaching a person within the same dimension should not pose a problem at all. The sky-blue flame seedling flickered slightly, seemingly trying to summon someone. Jiang Yaro dripped 3 droplets of blood onto the altar, and a powerful blaze rose up from the flame seedling as it morphed into the form of a person. The silhouette of the person became more and more distinct, but all of a sudden, with a resounding pop, the flame abruptly burst apart. Watching the entire process from the side, Zhongxian frowned. Having lived in the capital of the Master-Teacher Continent's otherworldly demonic tribe for some time, he had browsed through their massive collection of books. As such, he had some understanding regarding the rituals they conducted. This occurrence did not mean that the ritual had failed. On the contrary, the ritual had succeeded, it was just that the person they were trying to reach could not be summoned. In other words, something has happened to our palace master, Jiang Yaro and First Elder Zhao Yu muttered with utterly pale faces. Jiang Yaro turned to Zhongxian and anxiously explained, usually, the ritual would forge a connection link with our palace master's consciousness, allowing us to communicate directly with her. The abrupt dissipation of the flames means that either our palace master is rejecting the connection link or she's in no state to accept the connection link. Zhongxian's eyes narrowed into slits. Even after all the countermeasures that Du Qingyuan had prepared to distract the Hall of Gods, she was still caught by them in the end. If that was really the case, the Hall of Gods was far more terrifying than he had thought. What should we do now? Jiang Yaro asked First Elder Zhao Yu anxiously. In view of her safety, Du Qingyuan did not inform anyone of their whereabouts prior to her departure, so no one knew where she had gone. Given everything that she had done, it went without saying that she would have made sure to conceal her trail properly. So, it would be nigh impossible for them to find her. First Elder Zhao Yu suddenly thought of something, and she hurriedly took out a jade token from her storage ring. Before our palace master left, she told me to crush this jade token if she didn't return. Right after saying those words, she immediately crushed the jade token. Wang. There was a flash of light, and a line of words appeared in the air. Should I fail to return to Starchaser Palace, the one who will take my place as the palace master will be Zhongxian from the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. regard him with the utmost respect and obey his commands unconditionally. This. Reading the words in the air, First Elder Zhao Yu and Jiang Yaro exchanged gazes before hurriedly turning to look at Zhongxian. Zhongxian was also flabbergasted by the matter. Du Qingyuan had left a will behind to appoint him as the next head of Starchaser Palace. What was going on? Taking a closer look, he realized that there was an illusory figure right next to the message. His eyebrows shot up as he hurriedly pointed at the figure and asked, "Is that lady over there your palace master?" That illusory figure was the deity who had appeared on the master-teacher continent back when Sovereign Chen Yong conducted the ritual to summon Luo Ruoxin. First Elder Zhao Yu nodded. "That's indeed our palace master. As I expected." Zhongxian nodded slightly before a bitter smile crept onto his lips. He had guessed as much when he realized that the indigenous population living on Starchaser Island were from the otherworldly demonic tribe. He was just a single step away to learning the truth, but who could have thought that a mishap would occur at this moment? That person was likely the only one on the Forsaken Continent who knew of Luo Ruoxin's true identity, as well as where she had gone afterward. If something really happened to her, his only source of information would be severed. He had initially been a little surprised that Du Qingyuan would nominate him to be the next palace master, but after some thought, he could understand the rationale behind her decision. The only power who wielded the ability to force her, one of the strongest semi-divinity realm experts on the Forsaken Continent, into a corner was the Hall of Gods. And the only one who really wielded the strength to go against the Hall of Gods was him, the new sect leader of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion who had comprehended the God's sword intent. On top of that, while the names Liu Yang and Zheng Yang might have sounded foreign to others, as the one who had saved Wu Chen, it was likely that Du Qingyuan might have heard a thing or two from him and guessed that they were actually all him. It was probably in view of his current power and influence on the Forsaken Continent that she wanted to entrust Starchaser Palace to him so as to help it tide through this difficult period. Sect Leader Zhong. Jiang Yaro turned to Zhongxian and clasped her fist. "We believe that our palace master has her reasons for issuing such an order, and we are willing to heed her commands. May I know what your view on the matter is?" The two of them had personally witnessed Zhongxian's 4 semi-divinity realm beasts, so they had no doubts regarding his abilities. Furthermore, Du Qingyuan was a wise and discerning person. They trusted her judgment. "Since Palace Master Du trusts me so, I'm willing to take on the position as the new head of Starchaser Palace." Zhongxian nodded. He had thought that it was just a great deal of trouble to lead a sect initially, but the Hall of Gods had turned out to be a much more difficult opponent than he had expected. In order to counteract them, the 6 sects would have to unite together, but they would need someone to rally under. If he could become the head of Starchaser Palace, that would definitely give him much more credence. More importantly, Starchaser Palace held the means to contact Luo Ruoxin, even if Du Qingyuan was missing at the moment. "Thank you, Sect Leader Zhong." First Elder Zhao Yu bowed deeply. "We'll make preparations for the inauguration ceremony right now. For the time being, please do have a good rest at the accommodation we prepared for you. You must be exhausted after the trip to the city of collapsed space. Those from the other 5 sects should only be arriving tomorrow." Those from the other 5 sects had gathered together in order to discuss the details of how they would deal with the Azure Bridge. It would be good to hold the inauguration ceremony with the other 5 sects as witnesses to build prestige. They had no idea why Du Qingyuan would nominate the incumbent sect leader of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion as her successor, and to be honest, they had some qualms regarding the issue. However, they were also aware of the benefits it would bring. Having a common leader would create a firm foundation for an alliance between the 2 sects, thus granting them more power to deal with the Hall of Gods. "I understand." Zhongxian nodded. "For the time being, I wish to take a look at the library of Starchaser Palace." Even though he had already reached the High Immortal Realm, he was unable to advance his cultivation any further until he gathered sufficient cultivation techniques to compile the High Immortal Realm Heaven's Path Divine Art. "Of course, allow me to lead you there," First Elder Zhao Yu said. She quickly led Zhongxian over to the library before leaving to arrange the upcoming inauguration ceremony. So, Zhongxian quickly collected all the books within the library. Half a day later, he left the library and headed to an isolated chamber. As expected of a power that could communicate with the gods, Starchaser Palace had a massive collection of cultivation technique manuals that surpassed even that of the Seven-Star Pavilion. This was especially so when it came to books relating to souls. The soul-related books in the other sects could only be considered elementary compared to what they had. Compile. With a jolt of the Library of Heaven's Path, all the soul-related books were compiled into a high immortal realm Heaven's Path soul art. Shortly afterward, he moved on to compile all the high immortal realm cultivation techniques that he had gathered so far. With trembling fingers, Zhongxian nervously flipped open the compiled book, and after taking a look, he heaved a sigh of relief. There are still 3 more flaws, but they can be resolved by using items as catalysts. Even though Starchaser Palace's collection of high immortal realm cultivation techniques was limited, it was fortunate that they had collected quite a lot of insights and cultivation experiences of high immortals over the years. Water of heavy silver, metal of luminescent star, and grass of biting leaf. Each of these 3 items would resolve one of the flaws, but they were incredibly invaluable, such that they were worth even more than the diamond that the Seven-Star Pavilion had used earlier in the Ocean of Exiled Stars. I managed to obtain some grass of biting leaf back in the City of Collapsed Space, and its potency is even greater than that of normal ones, so that's fine. Zhongxian quickly ran through the various items that he had at the moment. The City of Collapsed Space was fraught with dangers, but the natural treasures that thrived in that environment still managed to convince many cultivators of each generation to brave the dangers. Back then, before he encountered the degeneration beasts, he had grabbed all the medicinal herbs that he could find, and fortunately, the grass of biting leaf was among them. As for metal of luminescent star, what luck! There happens to be one in Bai Xuansheng's storage ring. Zhongxian had secretly taken Citadel Lord Bai Xuansheng's storage ring before, and he had quickly checked on the contents earlier. There were all sorts of valuable things in there, 2 heavenly high immortal tier weapons, all sorts of precious medicinal herbs, ores, and cultivation resources. The metal of luminescent star was among them, too. Thus, all he was lacking was the water of heavy silver. He had read about this item in the books before. Similar to the Northern Sea Dragon Orb, it existed in the depths of the ocean, making it extremely difficult to find. Even the Seven-Star Pavilion, which had a massive information network and all sorts of connections, did not have a clue as to where to source one at the moment. Maybe I should take a look in the Ethereal Hall. It would be best if I could buy one straight away, but otherwise, I could try putting up a bounty. Since it was recorded in the books, it meant that there was someone in the world who had used it before. The only power that boasted a greater information network and more connections than the Seven-Star Pavilion was the Ethereal Hall. The Ethereal Hall had branches all over the Forsaken Continent, and most cultivators accessed the Ethereal Hall frequently. While he harbored some doubts regarding the Ethereal Hall after the encounter with Fu Chunzi, he felt that this was a risk that he had to take. Otherwise, there was no saying when he would be able to find the water of heavy silver. If he could advance his cultivation to the heavenly high immortal realm, he would be in a much better position to deal with the warriors of the Hall of Gods. With such thoughts in mind, Zhongxian left his room and quickly looked for First Elder Zhao Yu. Here is a high immortal realm ethereal token. Starchaser Palace is located on the remote Starchaser Island, so we didn't isolate Starchaser Palace from external ethereal halls. As such, you can enter the ethereal hall here, First Elder Zhao Yu said as she passed an ethereal token over. Thank you, Zhongxian replied with a smile. On the other hand, Jiang Yaro gazed at Zhongxian with a conflicted frown before eventually saying, "Be careful. I don't have any concrete evidence, but I'm not sure if the ethereal hall is trustworthy anymore." "I know. I will be careful." Zhongxian nodded grimly before taking his leave. He headed back to the isolated chamber and sat down. Holding the ethereal token tightly in his hand, he stared at the wall before him contemplatively. Thinking back, I was connected to the ethereal hall those 2 times before I was assassinated by the warriors of the Hall of Gods. Will it be the same this time? Chapter 2056 The Truth. It was right after he had visited Wuhai City's ethereal hall to purchase some superior immortal pills that he had been assaulted by them. It was the same for the second time around at Bun City. He had thought that it was weird that the Hall of Gods could accurately identify him back then, and he had even tried to loiter around the area to confirm once more if the Hall of Gods was really able to see through his disguise. Could something have happened to the ethereal hall? Even an elder of the ethereal hall, Fu Chunzi, had ended up colluding with the Hall of Gods. This was a huge cause for concern. Kong Shi's deeds on the master-teacher continent showed that he was a benevolent man who constantly had the welfare of the masses in mind. There was no way someone like that would collude with the Hall of Gods and incite chaos on the Forsaken Continent. However, the same could not be said about those who were continuing his legacy. After all, several thousand years had already passed since the founding of the Ethereal Hall. There was no doubt that the primary intentions for the founding of the Ethereal Hall were good, but as the organization expanded and developed through the years, for better or for worse, it was inevitable that it would begin to change. But all of this is speculation. I'll have to give it a try to know for sure if I'm right or not, Zhongxian thought as he activated the ethereal token and immersed his consciousness into it. The High Immortal Realm Ethereal Hall looked rather deserted compared to the other ethereal halls. Considering the low number of high immortals in the world, this was only to be expected. Zhongxian walked right up to the front receptionist and said, "Is it possible to purchase water of heavy silver here?" "Water of heavy silver?" the attendant asked with a slight frown, confused by the unfamiliar name. "Give me a moment, I'll check." He quickly flipped open a book, and a moment later, a smile broke out on his face. "Customer, even though the water of heavy silver is very rare, our ethereal hall happens to have some of it in stock. However, it might be a little pricey. How much does it cost?" Zhongxian asked. "Around 5 million ethereal coins," the attendant replied. "That was way beyond pricey. I don't have that many ethereal tokens with me at the moment, but is it possible for me to exchange this for a portion of water of heavy silver?" Zhongxian took out 3 jade bottles and placed them on the table. The attendant doubtfully uncorked one of the bottles, and concentrated spiritual energy immediately gushed out from the bottle. With a look of disbelief in his eyes, the attendant uttered, "Isn't this the blood essence of a semi-divinity realm expert? Is it enough?" Zhongxian asked. "Yes, of course. Definitely," the attendant replied anxiously. "I'll make the price estimation right now." There were only so many semi-divinity realm experts on the Forsaken Continent, which made their blood essence priceless treasures. Every single droplet of it harnessed tremendous energy. Furthermore, it would be difficult for a semi-divinity realm expert to produce 3 bottles of blood essence even over several decades without hurting their foundation. Sometime later, the attendant returned and passed 5 jade bottles over. "Customer, here are 5 bottles of water of heavy silver." Zhongxian nodded in relief. With all the 3 catalysts prepared, he should have no trouble pushing for a breakthrough to Heavenly High Immortal Realm anymore. The only thing to do now was to see if he would be assassinated by the warriors of the Hall of Gods. So, he backed out of the ethereal hall. He quickly set up multiple layers of defensive formations that would warn him of any approaching intruders and keep them at bay. Only after that did he take out the 3 catalysts and a bottle of semi-divinity realm blood essence. With a tap of his finger, the semi-divinity realm blood essence swiftly diffused into a powerful surge of spiritual energy that gathered around him like a tornado. While semi-divinity realm blood essence would be an invaluable treasure to any cultivator, he had no lack of it at the moment. To be exact, he had over 20 bottles of it in his storage ring. That was more than enough for him to splurge. He had managed to acquire that much through squeezing the bodies of Fu Chunzi and the middle-aged man from the Hall of Gods dry. Of course, he did not forget to cleanse it of the air of degeneration using Little Chick's chicken soup. In any case, Zhongxian began driving his Heaven's Path divine art, and his cultivation began surging once more. Greater High Immortal Realm, Earthly High Immortal Realm. In just an hour, he had already raised his cultivation to the Heavenly High Immortal Realm. Due to the lack of semi-divinity realm cultivation techniques, this was the highest level he could reach at the moment. There's no way I will be able to compile a semi-divinity realm Heaven's Path divine art here, so the only way I can advance is to forge my own path ahead and create my own cultivation technique. Zhongxian thought with a troubled look on his face. He knew of his own problems very well. The Heaven's Path divine art was indeed flawless, but ironically, this very trait of it was also its greatest flaw. It dawned upon him when his cultivation went berserk the previous time. There was no true perfection in this world. Even the heavens were flawed, so how could anything possibly be perfect? It was all just a matter of perspective. Nevertheless, it was true that cultivating the Heaven's Path divine art would guarantee him superior strength. It might not be as perfect as he thought, but it was the best that he had. But this very train of thought was poison to him. It made him dependent on the Heaven's Path divine art. The idea of cultivating something flawed disgusted him so much that he would retch for days on end. Even if he created something of his own, that lingering doubt that it was riddled with flaws would eventually become his greatest inner demon. So, this semi-divinity realm would surely be a huge hurdle for him to overcome. It was likely that he would have to create a semi-divinity realm cultivation technique with his own wisdom. It would be tough, but it was not impossible. Since others were able to do it, there was no reason for him not to be able to do it too. With such a thought in mind, Zhongxian entered the cultivation chamber inside the Library of Heaven's Path. It was the manifestation of the great codex of spring and autumn that Luo Ruoxin had installed within his Library of Heaven's Path before she left. Inside this unique cultivation chamber, the flow of time was 10 times faster than that of the master-teacher continent. Zhongxian had thought that the flow of time inside the cultivation chamber would change according to the flow of time to the Forsaken continent, but to his surprise, it remained the same as before. In other words, it was still 10 times faster relative to the master-teacher continent, which equated to 100 times faster than the time on the Forsaken continent. Even if he spent 100 days inside of the cultivation chamber, a single day would have only passed on the Forsaken continent. Even a mere hour in there would equate to 4 days on the Forsaken continent. Zhongxian first went through the Ascendant Cloud Sword God formula, which was the only semi-divinity realm cultivation technique that he knew of, before using it as a reference to further develop his Heaven's Path divine art. Just like that, he remained stationary for a very long while before he began to drive his zhenqi. But not too long later, he began coughing out blood. First try, failed. Unwilling to give up just like that, Zhongxian tried once more, but it was still a failure. He continued 100 more times, but he was still unable to make any progress. It's indeed not easy to make a breakthrough to the semi-divinity realm. Zhongxian shook his head helplessly. It was fortunate that he had Little Chick's chicken soup, allowing him to recover swiftly from his injuries. Otherwise, it would only be a matter of time before he sustained severe internal injuries under all his reckless experimentation. Feeling drained from all the thinking and experimentation, he finally retracted his consciousness from the great codex of spring and autumn. All in all, less than an incense's time had passed in the real world. Sighing deeply, Zhongxian severed a slight will of his consciousness and placed it inside his Library of Heaven's Path to continue researching the development of a semi-divinity realm cultivation technique. After that, he walked out of the isolated chamber. With his cultivation reaching the heavenly high immortal realm, his strength was already comparable to that of an average semi-divinity realm cultivator. Feeling confident, he retracted the formations around him before heading out to take a look. To be honest, he was slightly surprised to see that the Hall of Gods did not make a move while he was cultivating. Was his guess wrong? Could it be that they were hesitant to make a move because he was currently in Starchaser Palace? The last 2 times he had been assaulted, he had only been attacked after he left the ethereal hall and stepped into a public area. This conjecture did not seem too likely given that the Hall of Gods had attacked Chu Yin and First Elder Zhao Yu while they were at Starchaser Palace, but it was probably worth testing that out. So, Zhongxian silently left Starchaser Palace without informing anyone and headed to a remote location above the ocean of exiled stars. With a flick of his finger, he dropped several water droplets into the ocean. Even though he had many means at his disposal, he would not dare let down his guard against the Hall of Gods. Zhongxian sat on the surface of the ocean for over 2 hours, but everything remained quiet. Nothing happened at all. Could it really be that? Zhongxian thought with a deeply worried look on his face. His initial deduction was that there was a faction of traitors in the ethereal hall that was giving away his location to the Hall of Gods when he entered. However, from the current looks of it, That did not seem to be the case. This left him no choice but to turn to the other deduction he had in mind. If this deduction turned out to be true, that could really be the worst-case scenario for them at the moment. I can only give it a try then. He quickly changed his disguise, soul aura, and bloodline once more with the disguise amulet before entering the ethereal hall. He walked up to the receptionist, passed the token that he had received from Kongsha over, and said, "I want Premier Immortal Pills. Bring me as many of them as possible. This token. Esteemed customer, please give me a moment. I'll prepare your Premier Immortal Pills this instant," the receptionist said before hurriedly leaving the counter. An hour later, she returned with 2 jade bottles and said, "My apologies, but we are only able to gather 20 Premier Immortal Pills at the moment." "It's fine," Zhongxian said with a wave of his hand. Just 20 Premier Immortal Pills was enough to make even the richest man on the Forsaken Continent gasp. Superior Immortal Pills were worth 20,000 ethereal coins, and Premier Immortal Pills were 100 times more valuable than that. In other words, what he had just received was worth an unbelievable 40 million ethereal coins. Even the elusive water of heavy silver was only worth 5 million ethereal coins. Zhongxian retracted his consciousness, formed the ethereal hall and withdrew his Premier Immortal Pills. He uncorked one of the jade bottles and sighed in awe at the hulking amount of spiritual energy that each pill contained. Even with his current cultivation realm, the Premier Immortal Pills were still of great use to him. As long as I can figure out a semi-divinity realm cultivation technique, I will definitely be able to make a breakthrough with these pills. His current strength was already on par with semi-divinity realm cultivators, so their blood essence was no longer of much use to him. As such, he had been a little troubled over how he should push for a breakthrough to the semi-divinity realm. However, with these pills in his hand, there was no need for him to worry anymore. Zhongxian stretched his back lazily before slowly rising to his feet. He took another look around him once more, but there was still nothing at all. Of course, there's no way that could have been the case. He murmured with a hint of relief beneath his breath. Nodding in reassurance, he turned around to head back to Starchaser Palace. But right at that instant, the space around him suddenly began distorting. The brilliant sun seemed to have been plucked from the sky, plunging him into a dark world filled with stars. Hoo. An old man appeared before his eyes. This old man appeared to be in his 50s to 60s, and he was dressed in a simple grey robe. Just by standing quietly on the spot, he seemed like a phantom that wandered beneath the darkness of the night, drawing out the deepest fears in one's heart. "Are you from the Hall of Gods?" Zhongxian narrowed his eyes. This was not good at all. The powerful old man before him was one thing, but what was more important was the fact that the old man had only appeared after he used Kongsha's token in the ethereal hall. In other words, the token that Kongsha had given him actually served as a GPS locator for the Hall of Gods. Based on what he had heard from Han Zhenqiu, it appeared that Kongsha had handed this token to him personally, so the chances of anyone tampering with it were very low. Could it be that the world's teacher had really colluded with the Hall of Gods? Or could it be a misunderstanding? Zhongxian sighed deeply and shook his head. Regardless of the truth, it was good that he had sorted this matter out. At the very least, he knew who he had to be guarded against in the future. Then, he turned to look at the old man as he drove his zhenqi furiously. Chapter 2057 Counterattack. Astonishingly, even with his current cultivation realm, he was unable to see through the depths of the old man's cultivation. Up to this point, the strongest semi-divinity realm cultivators that he had met were Han Zhenqiu, Fu Chunzi, and the middle-aged man. However, the old man before him was at a whole different level from them. The aura that he emanated seemed to swallow the very essence of the world. The darkness engulfing them was a result of his aura devouring the light in the area. It felt like there was no way to escape from him at all. Taming 4 semi-divinity realm beasts and slaying Fu Chunzi and Ying Chen. It's no wonder the master values you so highly, choosing to mobilize even me to deal with you, the old man remarked. It's really beyond my imagination how you are able to come this far within 10 short days. Even the current me would have some trouble trying to capture you. You know that I was the one who killed Fu Chunzi and the middle-aged man? Zhongxian felt his body tensing up a little. It was likely that Ying Chen was the name of the middle-aged man from the Hall of Gods, who had made a move against Jiang Yaro in the City of Collapsed Space. But they had been in the City of Collapsed Space when he killed the two of them, and he had even made sure to seal the surroundings in order to ensure that those two would not be able to send any messages out to the Hall of Gods. So, how could the old man before him know of this matter? Furthermore, no one should have known that he had tamed 4 semi-divinity realm beasts other than Jiang Yao. Given that he had tamed the blackback tortoise in his capacity as Liu Yang, did that not mean that the Hall of Gods was aware of the fact that he was the head of the 7-star pavilion? This was impossible. He did not think that he would be able to hide this matter forever, but he did not expect someone to figure it out so quickly either. There's nothing the Hall of Gods doesn't know about, the old man replied nonchalantly, as if it was nothing to make a fuss about. Come with me. You might have 4 semi-divinity realm beasts and a semi-divinity artifact, but you won't stand a chance against me. How will I know if I don't give it a try? Zhong Xian scoffed. With a flick of his wrist, he brought out the blackback tortoise and the 3 sharks, and the 4 of them charged furiously toward the old man. He then took out the semi-divinity artifact and the 10 heavenly high immortal tier swords and directed them to assault the old man as well. It felt like even the stars in the sky would be knocked down by such an overwhelming force, but for some reason, no matter how they charged forward, they simply could not reach the old man. It was just a short distance of several steps between them and the old man, but this small gap formed the greatest difference in the world. Zhong Xian narrowed his eyes. Dimensional sand. He had encountered such a situation back when he was on the Master-Teacher continent as well. Back then, the space had been reduced to sand, such that no matter how quickly he was moving, he was unable to move forward at all. Could it be that the old man had comprehended such an ability as well? Through shattering the space before him into dust, those who stepped into the area would feel as though they were stepping into quicksand, preventing them from moving an inch no matter how powerful they were. Zhong Xian widened his eyes. No, that's not right. It isn't dimensional sand. It feels like that starry night in the surroundings is somewhat like his dominion. Those who step into this space have to obey his laws. All those who are weaker than him aren't able to approach him unless he allows them to. Not even dimensional sand would be that powerful as to completely halt even the movement of a semi-divinity realm expert. As long as a semi-divinity realm expert released their energy, they should be able to dispel the quicksand. However, the fact that the blackback tortoise and the 3 sharks were unable to do it hinted that there was an even greater power at play. In a sense, the old man was using an ability similar to Kongsha's word of law. In other words, all those who were pulled into this space would have to obey his rules. How could Zhong Xian win a battle like this? It was at this moment that Zhong Xian realized that he had once again underestimated just what semi-divinity realm cultivators were capable of. So, he knocked on his tamed beast sack and asked, "Little chick, are you still dead at the moment?" The little yellow chick in his tamed beast sack was likely his greatest hope at turning the tables around. While the other party was scarily unreliable in battle, there was no doubt that it possessed miraculous powers. Who? The little yellow chick remained completely motionless in his tamed beast sack, not responding to his calls at all. Ever since it devoured the droplet of god blood back in the vacant sea, it had gone completely silent, not moving at all. Knowing that there was nothing he could do about it, Zhong Xian could only gnash his teeth in frustration. I guess I can only rely on myself since that fellow is out, Zhong Xian thought as he raised his gaze to assess the old man before him. The latter was standing quietly on the spot with a slight smile on his face, not moving at all. Zhong Xian felt as if he was looking at a picture. Yet, despite the lack of movements on the latter's part, the 4 semi-divinity realm beasts and the others simply could not reach him at all. It's futile. In this space, even if you wield the strength of a semi-divinity, you still won't be able to hurt me, the old man commented as he raised his hand and waved it. Pada. The blackback tortoise and the others were immediately knocked down onto the surface of the ocean. They tried to regain their balance and get up, but for some reason, it felt as if the entire world was crashing down on them, preventing them from moving at all. After suppressing the 4 beasts, the old man raised his hand, and the semi-divinity metal chain immediately flew into his grasp. I'll be taking this back then. As soon as the old man's hand fell onto the metal chain, Zhongxian's eyebrows shot up. Now, two semi-divinity realm corpses immediately materialized right in front and behind the old man. Boom! Boom! Two resounding explosions occurred simultaneously, causing the surroundings to collapse inward from the sheer shockwave. As if a black cloth shrouding the sky was being forcefully pulled away, folds and cracks immediately appeared on the starry night sky above. Pu. The old man did not expect Zhongxian to be so vicious as to refine two semi-divinity corpses and explode them on him without the slightest shred of hesitation. Moreover, he even used a semi-divinity artifact as bait for him to lower his guard. Based on the sheer intensity of the explosion, it was likely that the artifact would have sustained damage severe enough to cripple it for good. In fact, if not for his dominion protecting him, he could have lost his life as a result of the explosion. His eyes crimson with rage, the old man bellowed with a savage glint in his eyes, "You obnoxious brat. I could have spared you, but you are really testing my patience, aren't you? Despite being a sack of old bones, I must say that you are as resilient as a cockroach," Zhongxian scoffed coldly. He had forged the corpses of Fu Chunzi and the middle-aged man into soulless metal humanoids, thinking that they would be a useful trump card against the Hall of Gods. It was indeed fortunate that he had done so. He had been wondering how he could allow those two fellows to get close to the old man, and after some thought, he had eventually decided to use the metal chain as bait. The metal chain was an extremely rare semi-divinity artifact that could alter its form, granting it great flexibility in battle. Zhongxian was confident that the old man would try to claim it for himself, and that would create a perfect opportunity for him to launch an attack. So, he had created a mini-folded space at the front and back of the metal chain and placed the two soulless metal humanoids inside. As expected, it had worked out well. It was just that he did not expect the old man to be so powerful as to survive the explosions from two semi-divinity realm experts at such proximity without sustaining any damage whatsoever. It was no wonder the Hall of Gods had only sent a single person this time to deal with him. It was apparent that they knew that it did not matter how many ordinary semi-divinity cultivators they sent at him, so they decided to send their strongest one instead. It was really lucky that he did not get arrogant and diligently made preparations beforehand, or else he might have been cornered. "You be **starred. I'll kill you." With a furious roar, the severely wounded old man charged toward Zhongxian. But as soon as he made a move, the space around him began warping once more, and a black mist swiftly crept out of nowhere. Rather than mist, it resembled billowing smoke that rose from an inferno maw. The earlier explosion had created cracks in the old man's dominion that allowed the black mist to creep in. "Do you think that a confinement formation of such a tier will really be able to stop me?" The old man sneered frostily. "You underestimate me too much, brat. This is nothing at all to me. I'll kill those four beasts of yours and drag you before my master." Boom. The surrounding spiritual energy surged toward the old man, and his injuries began to heal at a visible rate. The old man seemed to have used some sort of secret art that allowed him to swiftly recover from his injuries. "Your recovery ability is spectacular. I am very impressed. Your master must be much stronger than this. But don't you think that it's too naive of you to assume that this is just an ordinary confinement formation?" Zhongxian chuckled softly as he watched the old man's actions with composure. "Is it not?" The old man was taken aback. The next instant, his eyes widened, and his body began trembling in disbelief. "It can't be. You brought the air of degeneration out of the city of collapse space and infused it into the formation? You lunatic. I knew that I would require special means to deal with you persistent cockroaches. If you weren't injured, the air of degeneration would never have been able to harm you. In fact, I believe that you possess the means to suppress the air of degeneration and prevent it from seeping into your body with sheer strength. But what a pity. You were so anxious to capture me that you neglected your surroundings. You furiously absorbed the spiritual energy from the surroundings in order to quickly heal from your injuries, but that caused you to unwittingly take a massive amount of air of degeneration into your body. I wonder how much longer you have after getting so severely poisoned," Zhongxian scoffed. Given how potent the air of degeneration was, how could he not gather some of it to use as a weapon? Most cultivators of the high immortal realm and above already possessed the ability to ward off the air of degeneration, so its effects would have been severely lacking if he had used it directly. Thus, Zhongxian had known that he would have to find some way to severely injure the old man first before deploying it. Or better still, if he could force the old man into a position where the latter would take in the air of degeneration of his own accord, that would surely seal the latter's fate. Pu. The old man spat out 3 mouthfuls of black blood consecutively as his body trembled non-stop. He felt as if his head was going to explode. He had gone there completely confident that he would be able to accomplish his mission without fail. He had known that the young man was a witty person, but he did not think that the young man's wits would mean anything before his strength. He had never thought that he would meet such an end. Tzzzz. As the air of degeneration flowed through the old man's body, his innards became more and more corroded. Slowly, his vision began to blur, and his body began to sway weakly. It looked as if he would faint at any moment. I have underestimated you, but even though I might be unable to apprehend you, you don't possess the means to kill me. Just you wait. Knowing that his mission had already failed, the old man clenched his teeth and flew into the distance. Given his current condition, his only hope was to quickly return to the Hall of Gods and seek the Master's help in dispelling the air of degeneration in him. Otherwise, in less than an hour, he would become a pitch-black corpse. Do you think that I would have prepared so much just to allow you to escape at the last moment? Zhongxian laughed to himself. It's far too late for you to think about escaping. Boom. A halberd shot down from the sky, aimed right toward the old man's head. Alarmed, the old man tried to dodge, but it was too late. The halberd stabbed his shoulder, causing him to halt. Chapter 2058 Suicidal. The halberd was the offensive-oriented semi-divinity artifact that he had obtained from the middle-aged man. Naturally, he did not neglect to tame it on his way there, and the only reason he had not brought it out thus far was because he had planted it in advance to snipe down the enemy should the latter attempt to escape. If the old man had been at full power, there was no way such an attack would have worked. However, his severe injuries and the corrosion of the air of degeneration had reduced the old man's fighting prowess to less than 1/100th of what it was, not to mention that the old man had devoted the dredges of his strength to escape. Even though the old man had managed to avoid being skewered in the head, the halberd would still ensure that the other party would not be able to escape. Putong. Unable to withstand the impact of the halberd, the old man plummeted into the water, causing a tall pillar of water to rise into the air. Woohoo! Witnessing this sight, the blackback tortoise and the 3 sharks immediately went into action. The ocean was their battlefield, and their pride would not allow any land dwellers to best them on their home turf. The severe water swiftly turned choppy, and furious waves could be seen rising one after another. A few breaths later, a dying old man was dragged out from the surface of the sea by Shark One. If Zhongxian's means had shaved away 90% of the old man's health points, the encirclement of the 4 beasts had destroyed another 90% out of the remaining 10%. If not for the old man's resilient mind, he likely would have fallen into a coma due to the multiple traumas that he had sustained. Facing the old man, who was held firmly in place by the 4 beasts, Zhongxian stared at the old man firmly in the eye and asked, "Who is your master? Why are you trying to kill me?" He was utilizing the means of a soul oracle in order to interrogate the old man. Through befuddling one's consciousness, it was possible to make one reveal one's deepest secrets. It was just that he was usually reluctant to use these means. "I finally understand why the master is so bent on capturing you. Your capabilities are truly formidable," the old man replied calmly, completely unaffected by Zhongxian's means. "The winner takes it all. Since I have lost, the only fate that awaits me is death. You need not dream of trying to pry any information out of my mouth. *T. Retreat." Before the old man could even finish his words, Zhongxian's eyes suddenly narrowed in horror. He hurriedly pulled his 4 beasts together with him and dived into the depths of the ocean. Kaboom! A few instants later, an explosion of unbelievable proportions occurred. With a deafening rumble, overwhelming pressure and devastating heat waves swept across the ocean of exiled stars, threatening to vaporize everything. A humongous mushroom cloud could be seen rising in the air. The water that was within the area of the explosion scattered over a radius of several hundred li, causing a massive flash rain. Pu 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 pu. Blood spurted from the mouths of Zhongxian and the four beasts, and it took them a long while before they came to. It was only 3 breaths between the moment Zhongxian realized what the old man was going to do and the moment of the explosion. With the incredible speed of the semi-divinity realm aquatic beasts, they were able to dive tens of thousands meters deep within this short period of time. Nevertheless, they were still nearly blown to smithereens by the explosion. If they had been standing right next to the old man when he exploded his cultivation, their bodies and souls would have been obliterated on the spot. And he dared to call me a lunatic. Zhongxian murmured as he looked at the massive crater that had appeared on the surface of the ocean as a result of the explosion. Even the blackback tortoise, who boasted near-invincible defense, could not help but shudder when it recalled how close it had just come to death. It had long heard that the Hall of Gods was filled with deranged individuals, but who would have thought that they would really off their rockers? To engage in suicide bombing without the slightest hesitation. Just the shock was enough to shave decades off its lifespan. That was really too terrifying. It's a pity. Zhongxian shook his head. It's indeed a pity how someone as powerful as him came to such a tragic end. Shark One nodded in agreement. That's not it. I find it a huge pity how I paid such a huge price to defeat him, only to receive nothing in return. Is there a greater tragedy than this in the world? Zhongxian cried out. The 4 semi-divinity realm beasts. Zhongxian had really gone all out to defeat the old man. He had used 2 semi-divinity corpses and used up his air of degeneration. Even his semi-divinity artifact had ended up sustaining severe damage as a result of the plan. He had thought that it would at least be worth it if he could trade all that for a more powerful soulless metal humanoid, but in the end, he had received nothing at all. To put it in simpler terms, he had invested heavily in the battle, only to reap no returns. It was inevitable that he would feel so stifled. But thinking about it again, given the opponent that he was up against, he was already lucky to still be alive. With a grasp of his hand, the tattered semi-divinity metal chain swiftly flew to Zhongxian. He took out several bottles of chicken soup and soaked the metal chain with it. Tzzzzzzzz. It did not take long for the metal chain to recover to its original condition. Naturally, Zhongxian had known that this was possible prior to the execution of the plan. Otherwise, he would have found it hard to part with such a useful semi-divinity artifact. Let's return. Knowing that it was likely that the Hall of Gods would not dispatch anyone for him in the short term after losing such a powerful expert, Zhongxian quickly moved the other 4 beasts back into the tamed beast sack, preparing to leave the area. At this moment, though, a voice suddenly echoed in his mind. Master, were you looking for me earlier? Is something up? A little yellow chick leisurely waddled in front of him. Its small, feeble body was swaying from side to side, reminiscent of a drunkard who had just awoken from a long sleep. Just looking at this sight filled Zhongxian with the urge to rush forward and give that little yellow chick a beating it would never forget. When he wanted its help earlier, that little yellow chick was sleeping like a dead log, but as soon as the enemy was defeated and the coast was clear, it popped up and asked if he needed help. It was almost as if it was mocking him. If not for his good temper and the possibility that he might not have been able to defeat it, he would have charged forward that very instant to pummel it. Your cultivation doesn't seem to have grown at all? Shark One asked with a doubtful voice. Zhongxian was slightly surprised to hear that for a moment. He quickly turned his gaze over, and indeed, there was something amiss. He had thought that the little yellow chick, after devouring a droplet of the god blood, would experience a huge growth spurt and reach the same level as the blackback tortoise and the others. Yet, contrary to his expectations, it felt the exact same as before. There was no change to its cultivation, and even its physical appearance looked the same as before. It was as if the god blood was totally ineffective on it. But how could that be? Even if it was less than a droplet, that was still the blood of a real god. There was no way it could have just disappeared into the little yellow chick without making any difference at all. I don't really know why. I suddenly felt intoxicated after drinking that blood, so I slept for a while. That thing didn't seem to do anything except make me fall asleep. Little Chick shook its little bottom as it spoke. It was also surprised to see things turning out this way. It had thought that consuming the god blood would allow it to become a powerful expert in an instant, but things did not happen as it expected. If even god blood did not work on it, how was it supposed to advance its cultivation to higher realms? All right then. Zhongxian carried on asking a few more questions, and he even made sure to examine Little Chick closely, but there were really no visible changes. In the end, he had no choice but to shrug in exasperation. In the end, he stowed Little Chick back into the tamed beast sack together with the other 4 beasts before heading back to Starchaser Island. Nearly a day had passed since heading over, and it was about time for his inauguration as the new head of Starchaser Palace. As he had used an alias back at the Myriad Beasts Hall and the 7-Star Pavilion, everyone thought that they were different individuals, so the response had not been too intense. But this time, the very same Zhongxian who was known to be the sect leader of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion was going to become the Palace Master of Starchaser Palace as well. Just thinking about how high profile it would be made him gasp a little. Most likely, the news should have already reached all the other sects, stirring a commotion of unprecedented proportions. Just as Zhongxian thought, an uproar had indeed been stirred on Starchaser Island. I can't believe this. Why is our Starchaser Palace nominating an outsider as the next head? Where is our Palace Master? Why isn't she announcing the news? It seems to be a unanimous decision made by the First Elder and the rest. Our Palace Master seems to be out at the moment. Are they making this decision without consulting our Palace Master? Isn't that equivalent to a revolt? Are you insane? How can you say those words aloud? Based on what I heard, our Palace Master left a will behind nominating sect leader Zhongxian to take over her position. Such discussions could be heard throughout Starchaser Palace. As the indigenous population of the Forsaken Continent, they had never been on good terms with the other sects. Under normal circumstances, even if their Palace Master wanted to step down, she should have nominated one of her own people to take over her position. Yet, she actually chose to pass down her seat to the sect leader of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. Just the very thought of it was ridiculous. This was as good as trampling on the dignity and prestige of Starchaser Palace. An elder harumphed in displeasure. Shut your mouths. Our Palace Master has made an offering to a god, and it's under the will of the god that she made such a decision. Could it be that you think that your words weigh more than those of a god? Under the will of the god? Those who had voiced their doubts earlier swiftly shut their mouths fearfully upon hearing that. As the ones closest to the gods of the firmament, those from Starchaser Palace had always carried great deference toward the gods in their hearts. They did not think that the elder would dare make a false claim under the name of a god, so naturally, they dared not question her words anymore. On the other hand, however, it was proving a difficult feat to convince those of the other sects to accept this matter. In the main hall of Starchaser Palace sat a very confused Han Zhenqiu. Just what in the world did our sect leader do to make Du Qingyuan willingly nominate him as her successor? He knew that Zhongxian had been determined to make his way to the ocean of exiled stars, but what he did not expect was for the latter to squeeze Du Qingyuan out and take over her position within a few short days. Could this have been something that was planned beforehand? If that was the case, why did Zhongxian claim that he was an unaffiliated cultivator? Regardless of the truth, this isn't necessarily a bad thing for the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. It'll be good if we can forge a friendly relationship with Starchaser Palace, Han Zhenqiu murmured with a frown. When he passed his position down to Zhongxian, he had already resolved himself to follow the latter's directives. No matter what it was, as long as it did not compromise the welfare of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, he would follow the young man's orders. It would be unbecoming if he, as an elder of the sect, attempted to overturn the sect leader's decision without a compelling reason. Who? Han Zhenqiu, what happened? A shadow flashed through the air as a figure rushed right into the main hall. It was none other than Elder Qin Yuan from the Myriad Beasts Hall. I can't accept this. There's no way the 7-Star Pavilion can accept this. Unless you can give me a proper explanation for this matter, you can expect our 7-Star Pavilion to take necessary actions in retaliation. Elder Kuei Xiao walked into the main hall right behind Elder Qin Yuan. They were all staring at Han Zhenqiu intently, expecting him to explain what had just happened. How in the world did the head of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion end up becoming the head of Starchaser Palace as well? The 6 sects had always been independent existences, each of them reigning over a region of the Forsaken Continent. There had never been any official alliance within the 6 sects. It was this balance of power that had allowed for peace and harmony among them. As such, it was inevitable that the other sects would feel a little nervous upon hearing this news. "I'm not sure what's going on either," Han Zhenqiu replied with a troubled frown. "You aren't sure?" Elder Qin Yuan had always been extremely hot-tempered. Upon hearing how Han Zhenqiu was intending to feign ignorance, he immediately flung his sleeves and bellowed, "Do you think that we'll let this matter pass just because you don't know a thing? You are shaking the power balance of the 6 sects with this move. Did you think that your Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion is the only one capable of making alliances? Very well. Just you wait. Our Myriad Beasts Hall shall make an alliance with the 7-star Pavilion as well." Sect leader Zhong might have comprehended the God's Sword intent, but he isn't the only genius on the Forsaken Continent, Elder Kue Xiao sneered. "Our 7-star Pavilion has Pavilion Master Liu Yang, whereas the Myriad Beasts Hall has Hall Master Zheng Yang. Shall we see if he can stand his ground even against the 2 of them?" Chapter 2059. What is Hall Master Kong up to? Han Zhenqiu was unable to speak at all. He had heard of Hall Master Zheng Yang and Pavilion Master Liu Yang as well, and they were reputed to be extraordinary geniuses who only appeared once every several thousand years. People of their caliber would surely be able to stand against even Zhong Xian and his God's Sword intent once they matured. It would not be a wise decision to make enemies out of them. An alliance between the 7-star Pavilion and the Myriad Beasts Hall would certainly be to the disadvantage of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. Not to mention, he had not understood just how many benefits Zhong Xian had promised Starchaser Palace in order to convince Du Qingyuan to pass down her position to him. What a commotion! At this instant, hearty laughter suddenly echoed outside the main hall. Following that, 2 silhouettes walked into the room. The head of the Black Mirror Citadel, Bai Shensheng. The head of the Evanescent Immortal Sect, Jiyu Zhueyun. The appearance of these 2 caused the atmosphere in the room to become even tenser. With this, almost all the heads and ex-heads of the 6 sects were present in the room. Bai Shensheng had been recuperating all this while, and while he still appeared a little pale on the surface, his current condition would not affect his exertion of strength anymore. As for Jiyu Zhueyun, he was a tall, lanky old man with a haughty look on his face. "The 2 of you are concerned about our sect leader becoming the head of Starchaser Palace as well?" Han Zhenqiu asked with a deep sigh. "Would you believe me if I said that I am unaware of this matter?" Bai Shensheng shot a cold glance at Elder Kue Xiao before clasping his fist toward Han Zhenqiu. "Elder Han, I think you are misunderstanding our intention. We are here to meet sect leader Zhong Xian in order to discuss something with him." He did not manage to catch a clear glimpse of the faces of the culprits who had done him in at the Sea of Little Mirror back then. That being said, there was no such thing as a perfect secret in the world, especially when it came to a major operation like that. There were not too many diamond crystals of that brilliance in the world. All he had to do was track down the sect that had acquired such a diamond crystal recently. "You wish to meet our sect leader?" Han Zhenqiu frowned. "That matter concerns the future of the 6 sects. I want to hear Hall Master Zheng Yang and Pavilion Master Liu Yang's opinions on the matter," Jiyu Zhueyun said as he glanced at Elder Qin Yuan and Elder Kue Xiao. "May I know what the matter you are referring to is?" Han Zhenqiu asked with a perplexed frown. It was apparent that Bai Shensheng and Jiyu Zhueyun were standing on the same line on this matter, whatever it might be. In fact, there was a good chance that they might have already forged an alliance with one another. We can all agree that semi-divinities are the strongest experts on the Forsaken Continent. A sect must have a semi-divinity realm cultivator in order to enjoy peace and prosperity in the long term, Jiyu Zhueyun began explaining. The crowd nodded in agreement. The presence of a semi-divinity realm cultivator dictated whether a sect was able to prosper or not. Without the presence of a cultivator in the highest tier, it mattered not how many high immortals a sect had. It was also for this very reason that the six sects had been able to suppress the aquatic creatures all these years. Jiyu Zhueyun continued. The Azure Bridge is going to descend very soon. Are those sect leaders of yours confident of defeating the warriors of the Hall of Gods to earn the qualifications to reach the semi-divinity realm? No one was able to say a word, not even Han Zhenqiu. After all, who could possibly make such a declaration? There was no denying that sect leader Zhongxian was powerful, but his cultivation was only at the heavenly true immortal realm at the moment. At that level, he would have difficulties trying to deal with ordinary heavenly high immortal realm cultivators, let alone the warriors of the Hall of God. The same went for the Myriad Beasts Hall and the Seven-Star Pavilion. While the unparalleled talents of their new heads sparked great hope within them, deep in their hearts, they were still uncertain if they would be able to overcome the Azure Bridge. They had challenged the Azure Bridge themselves many years back, and they knew just how difficult it was. Seeing the expressions on everyone's faces, the edges of Jiyu Zhueyun's lips inched upward as he spoke up. However, our evanescent immortal sect and Black Mirror Citadel are confident of it. Confident? Han Zhenqiu and the others looked at Jiyu Zhueyun in disbelief. Just what in the world gave him the confidence to make a bold claim like this? Take a look at this, Jiyu Zhueyun said as he flicked his wrist and took out a jade token. Han Zhenqiu took the jade token and looked at its contents. A moment later, he raised his head to look at Jiyu Zhueyun once more, this time with an even more confused look on his face, and asked, "What is this?" Recorded within the jade token were the battle techniques, moves, and flaws of a certain cultivator. It is the information of a warrior of the Hall of Gods who fought with the geniuses of our evanescent immortal sect. Jiyu Zhueyun replied. The information of a warrior of the Hall of Gods. The other three immediately rose to their feet as they looked at Jiyu Zhueyun in disbelief. If they could acquire detailed information regarding the warriors of the Hall of Gods in advance, they would be able to make preparations and design a battle strategy that would pretty much guarantee their victory. Hall Master Qin Yuan quickly took the jade token in order to browse through its contents. Then, with an agitated look on his face, he asked, "How did you manage to acquire something like that?" The information appeared to be legitimate, but he still found it hard to believe that the evanescent immortal sect was actually able to acquire something as precious as this. The Hall of Gods had always been a lofty existence. They rarely made a move, but when they did, there were never any eyewitnesses. As such, it was nigh impossible to gather any information regarding them. Of course, there's no way we would have the means to acquire something like this by ourselves. The one who compiled and gave us the jade token is the Ethereal Hall, Jiyu Zhueyun replied. Hall Master Kong is indeed an extraordinary figure. He's the closest existence to a god among us all. He gave us all of this information and said that as long as the candidates cultivate according to his advice, they should be able to easily clear the Azure Bridge and reach the semi-divinity realm. Hall Master Kong. Han Zhenqiu frowned in skepticism. There's no such thing as a free lunch in the world. Why would Hall Master Kong risk offending the Hall of Gods to give this to us? Putting aside where Hall Master Kong had acquired the information from, assuming that the information was true, it would only be a matter of time before the Hall of Gods traced the leak of information to him. Once that happened, even with Hall Master Kong's superior strength, it was unlikely that he would be able to fare too well against the Hall of Gods. Of course, there's no way we wouldn't understand something as basic as that. In exchange for this information, Hall Master Kong requested to borrow our evanescent boots and Paragon Black Mirror for a month, Jiyu Zhueyun replied with a chuckle. Han Zhenqiu's complexion immediately turned grim. Even though the guardian artifacts of our six sects aren't semi-divinity artifacts, they contain the blood essence and energies of our predecessors. In a battle, they can exert might that surpasses even that of semi-divinity artifacts. Is it really fine for you to loan it out so easily? Just like how Starchaser Palace had an altar that could communicate with the gods, each of the six sects had their guardian artifacts as well. The guardian artifact of the evanescent immortal sect was the evanescent boots. It was said that the founder of the sect had forged them with celestial meteorite. After putting them on, one would be able to tread across space and cover millions of li within a single breath. On the other hand, The guardian artifact of the Black Mirror Citadel was the Paragon Black Mirror. It was able to seal a person's soul through its reflection, thus incapacitating that individual. These artifacts had not reached the semi-divinity realm yet, but they exerted a force that even semi-divinity realm experts would shudder to face. Putting everything aside, even Elder Qin Yuan would have to flee in the face of those artifacts. As for the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, its guardian artifact was a sword left behind by its founder. Having been tempered by the god's sword intent, it wielded overwhelming might that could slay even semi-divinity realm experts with ease. The Myriad Beasts Hall had an Earth Wyvern ancestor. It was just that the latter had fallen into a deep sleep a long time ago, and it was unknown whether it was still alive. The Seven-Star Pavilion had a unique artifact known as the Seven-Star Chess. It was rumored to be a chess set once used by the gods. No one knew of its exact tier, but it was said to be an extremely profound artifact. Of course, due to the sheer power of these guardian artifacts, they could only be activated and used by semi-divinity realm cultivators. Otherwise, the 6 sects would be able to ensure their longevity just with these guardian artifacts. These guardian artifacts were the greatest trump cards of the 6 sects, but the Black Mirror Citadel and the Evanescent Immortal sect had actually loaned them out so easily over a mere possibility. Even though the Ethereal Hall's tracks had remained clean throughout the years, it was still unwise to place a tool that could dictate the fate of a sect in the hands of an outsider. It might not be my place to say this, but without these guardian artifacts, you will be powerless to protect yourselves if the Hall of Gods make a move on you, Hall Master Qin Yuan said with a deep frown. This was a particularly unwise move, especially since the Hall of Gods had become unnaturally active in recent days. To give away their greatest trump card in such uncertain times did not seem like a good idea at all. Powerless to protect ourselves? Do you think that we would fail to consider something this obvious? Jiyu Zhueyun burst into laughter. With a flick of his wrist, a set of armor materialized around his body. This armor emanated a pressure reminiscent of a conqueror. That is, a semi-divinity defensive artifact. Han Jianqiu and the others were stunned. Not a single one of the 6 sects had a semi-divinity artifact, so where in the world did Jiyu Zhueyun manage to acquire one? That's right. It's a bestowment from Hall Master Kong. This artifact and the information regarding the warrior of the Hall of Gods is what Hall Master Kong paid in exchange for borrowing our guardian artifact, Jiyu Zhueyun replied. Han Jianqiu and the others were flabbergasted. This was unbelievable. To give out semi-divinity artifacts and the information regarding a warrior of the Hall of Gods just to borrow their guardian artifacts for a month. Even with the vast wealth that the Ethereal Hall commanded, surely they could not afford to squander their fortune like that. If that's the case, it means that Citadel Lord Bai has a semi-divinity artifact too, right? I believe that Elder Kuei Xiao should know very well if I have a semi-divinity artifact or not. Bai Xiansheng spat as he glared at Elder Kuei Xiao savagely. Me? How would I know something like that? Elder Kuei Xiao scoffed incredulously, as if he knew nothing about the matter. Of course, he knew the truth better than anyone else. He had been wondering where Bai Xiansheng had acquired the semi-divinity artifact, but in the end, it turned out to be from an exchange with the Ethereal Hall. It was just that their pavilion master had robbed Bai Xiansheng back in the Sea of Little Mirror, taking away the latter's weapons and storage ring. He knew that there was no way he could admit to this matter, or else there could be severe complications in the future. Don't bother putting on an act before me. The both of us know very well what happened in the Sea of Little Mirror, Bai Xiansheng bellowed. He had realized that all his items had disappeared when he came to. It did not take him much thinking to figure out that the culprit was the one who had been hiding not too far away while he was fighting with the blackback tortoise. And it stood to reason that the one who was hiding in the area was the one who had prepared the diamond crystal to lure the blackback tortoise over in the first place. I don't know why you would make such a claim, but we can clarify the misunderstanding between the both of us later on. What I'm more concerned with is why Hall Master Kong would go to such lengths make a deal like this. Elder Kuei Xiao knew that it would only make things more awkward if they continued dwelling on the matter, so he decided to focus on the matter at hand. Aren't you concerned about what Hall Master Kong is going to use your guardian artifacts for? It had prospered for the past several thousand years after snatching a god character from the Hall of Gods, such that it boasted the greatest number of treasures in the world. Why would it pay such a heavy price just to acquire theirs? It was truly an enigma what Hall Master Kong was up to. Chapter 2060 Meeting Han Zhenqiu. Hall Master Kong has always been a mysterious person. He made his name several thousand years ago, reaching heights that are comparable to our founders. Our founders have already turned to dust, but he remains active in the world. It's truly hard to imagine just how far he has advanced in his cultivation, Jiyu Zhueyun remarked. Given his standing, it's hard to imagine that he would renege on his words and steal our guardian artifacts. I don't see any harm lending it to him for a month. The sharp Han Zhenqiu immediately realized what Jiyu Zhueyun was getting at, and a deep frown appeared between his eyebrows. So, you are here to advise us to lend our guardian artifacts to Hall Master Kong too? Jiyu Zhueyun nodded. Indeed. We are doing this for the collective welfare of the 6 sects. Our Evanescent Immortal Sect and Black Mirror Citadel have already agreed to forge an alliance with one another. If we clear the Azure Bridge together, the number of semidivinities that we have will far surpass that of the rest of you. Once that happens, there's no way you will be able to catch up to us anymore. Are you threatening us? Elder Kue Xiao asked with a glint in his eyes. I'm just presenting facts, Jiyu Zhueyun replied calmly. Han Zhenqiu and the others fell silent. There was some truth in what Jiyu Zhueyun was saying. The balance among the 6 sects was maintained by the fact that they only had a semidivinity realm cultivator each, and none of them had any semidivinity artifacts. Once the balance was broken, the future would become uncertain. Those in the weaker position could very well find their sects slowly being devoured by the others, thus becoming nothing more than words in the annals of history. If it's such a good deal, why did Hall Master Kong send you to persuade us instead of coming here himself? Elder Kue Xiao asked. He had 5 words to describe the deal that Hall Master Kong was offering them, too good to be true. Given that the guardian artifacts were part of the foundation of their sects, there was no way they could loan them out too easily. That being said, to receive a semidivinity artifact and precious information concerning the Hall of Gods in return for lending their guardian artifacts for a month, this was a deal that was really moving, so much that it reeked of a scheme. Years of experience as the heads of their respective sects had taught them to look at things objectively. If something was too good to be true, that was likely the case. If he was really offering that good a deal, why did Hall Master Kong not approach them himself? Hall Master Kong has something more important to deal with at the moment, so he's unable to personally negotiate. That being said, he has promised that he will rush to the heaven-anchoring boulder prior to the descent of the Azure Bridge. However, it will be pointless to only acquire the information regarding the warriors of the Hall of Gods then. You will have lost precious time to make preparations in advance and exploit their weaknesses, Jiyu Zhueyun replied. Even if the candidates knew the weaknesses of their enemies beforehand, there was still a huge gap between them and the warriors of the Hall of Gods. They would need to make preparations beforehand in order to bridge that gap and achieve victory. For that, they would need some time. You should hurry up and make up your minds. We'll have to make our way over to the heaven-anchoring boulder after sect leader Zhong Xian concludes the inauguration ceremony. I'll just take it as you aren't interested in the deal if you aren't able to come to a decision by then, Jiyu Zhueyun said, standing up from his seat. That's all I have to say. Farewell. Having said his piece, he turned around and flew away. Bai Shensheng quickly followed behind him. After the 2 of them had departed, the atmosphere in the room grew heavy once more. Elder Kue Xiao was the first one to stand up. Elder Han, I'll be taking my leave. Elder Qin Yuan swiftly rose to his feet and said, I'll be leaving, too. Just like that, the 2 of them left the main hall. Seeing that everyone had left, Han Zhenqiu pondered deeply for a moment before getting up. I should also quickly get in contact with our sect leader to discuss this matter with him. This matter could very well determine the survival of their sect in the long run. This was not something that he could decide by himself anymore. While Han Zhenqiu was attempting to contact Zhong Xian, Elder Qin Yuan quickly caught up with Elder Kue Xiao and stopped him for a conversation. It's likely that Starchaser Palace and the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion have received some sort of information that prompted them to nominate the same person as their sect leaders, thus sealing their alliance. The Black Mirror Citadel and the Evanescent Immortal Sect have also accepted the Ethereal Hall's deal, forming an alliance of their own through this. That leaves only us. We aren't in a good position at all, Elder Qin Yuan said with a bitter smile on his lips. That leaves only us. We aren't in a good position at all, Elder Qin Yuan said with a bitter smile on his lips. My thoughts exactly. Shall we form an alliance of our own? Elder Kuei Xiao nodded in agreement. As the heads of their respective powers, they had to be extremely sensitive to the power balance among the 6 sects, or else they might just end up getting devoured before they knew it. In the earlier meeting, they had found that they had been placed in a weaker position than the rest, and that had forced them to have to go along with the whims of the others. This was not a good position to be in. Since things have reached this point, I'll send a message to our Hall Master and urge him to come back quickly. It would be good if he could meet Pavilion Master Liu Yang face to face to discuss the details regarding our alliance, Elder Kuei Xiao said. I'll inform our Pavilion Master about the matter right away. Elder Kuei Xiao nodded. So, the two of them took out their communication jade tokens and began liaising with their newly inaugurated heads. Zhong Xian had been recuperating on his way back to Starchaser Island, and by the time he arrived at his destination, he had already recovered to his full strength. As he made his way over to Starchaser Palace, he flicked his wrist and took out a communication jade token. Sect Leader Zhong, please head to the accommodation of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion as quickly as possible. There was a map below the words that indicated the position of the accommodation. It would be good to meet Han Zhenqiu and ask him how in the world I ended up becoming the sect leader of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, Zhong Xian thought with a shake of his head. So, he quickly flitted over to the location marked on the map. He had still been an ordinary elder when he left the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, so when in the world did he get promoted? To make matters worse, it seemed like the entire world, with the exception of him, knew of the matter. Barely after flying a few li, he suddenly flicked his wrist and took out another communication jade token. Hall Master Zheng, please head to the Chongyuan gazebo. There are important matters that we need to discuss with you. The person who had sent the message was Elder Qin Yuan. Chongyuan gazebo? Zhong Xian murmured beneath his breath. He did not think that 2 sects would look for him simultaneously. He took a look at the map indicated below and found that the Chongyuan gazebo was not located too far from the accommodation of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. He pondered for a moment before bringing his clone out and saying, I need you to head to the Chongyuan gazebo to check out what's going. But before he could finish his words, a bizarre expression appeared on his face. He flicked his wrist once more, and yet another communication jade token materialized in his grasp. There was a line of words on it. Pavilion Master Liu, come to the Green Fate quarters as soon as you receive this message. There are urgent matters that we need to talk about. The person who had sent this message was Elder Kuei Xiao. Zhong Xian was stunned. He had thought that he could head over to the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion's accommodation to meet Han Zhenqiu while his clone made his way over to the Chongyuan gazebo to meet Elder Qin Yuan, but it turned out that all 3 sects wanted to meet him at once. How was he supposed to deal with this situation? Never mind, let's deal with whatever we can at the moment. I'll head to the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion's accommodations, and you can head to the Chongyuan gazebo. No, that won't do. Forget it, I think it'll be better if you come with me. Zhong Xian eventually dropped the idea of sending his clone over by himself. Even though his clone had originated from his soul, for some reason, it felt as if his clone was suffering from a dissociative personality disorder, taking on a completely different character from him. His clone was a compulsive braggart, making use of every chance it had to show off. It completely lacked humility and a low-profile disposition. How could someone like that be trusted to do great things? What if his clone caused trouble while meeting Elder Qin Yuan? That would only add to his burdens. Since that was the case, he might as well keep the other party with him. Thus, he returned his clone to his storage ring before rushing ahead. Half a minute later, he arrived at the accommodation of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. Sect leader Zhong. Han Zhenqiu quickly stood up and bowed. He went through the earlier happenings in detail before asking, "What should we do now? Should we accept the Ethereal Hall's deal?" The Ethereal Hall is trading a semi-divinity artifact and information regarding the Azure Bridge for the right to borrow the guardian artifacts of the 6 sects for a month. Zhong Xian was slightly bewildered by the news. Had it been in the past, he certainly would have accepted such a deal. Considering that it was the world's teacher of the master-teacher continent that he was dealing with, he could trust that the latter would not use the guardian artifacts improperly. But now, he dared not make such assumptions. It might still have been possible that Fu Chunzi had colluded with the Hall of Gods behind Kongsha's back, but he had proved that the token that Kongsha had given him was actually the key that lured the experts of the Hall of Gods to him. It was apparent that something was amiss. This matter could have severe implications. "I think it would be for the best to meet Hall Master Kong in person so that we can better understand what he's trying to do," Zhong Xian said. If Kongsha was indeed making this deal in order to help the 6 sects, the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion would be at a severe disadvantage if it turned down the offer. However, at the same time, given the bizarre movements from the Ethereal Hall recently, it was more important than ever to tread carefully. "I understand," Han Zhenqiu replied with a nod. Then, with a hint of doubt in his eyes, he continued asking, "Sect leader Zhong, did you receive some sort of important news that prompted you to become the new head of Starchaser Palace?" "That's a long story." Zhong Xian went through the details about how the Hall of Gods had forced Starchaser Palace to submit to them, how the Ethereal Hall had gotten involved in the matter, and how Du Qingjuan had abruptly disappeared without a trace. He did not mention his identity as the new head of 7-Star Pavilion. After hearing the matter, a grim look appeared on Han Zhenqiu's face. "I am very familiar with Du Qingyuan. Her cultivation is very powerful, such that even I would have difficulties trying to defeat her. There aren't too many powers in the world that have the ability to make her vanish without a trace." Zhong Xian frowned. Who on the Forsaken Continent has the ability to do that? If there was not too big a gap in prowess, Du Qingyuan should have at least been able to send out a signal for help. Taking the old man he had encountered above the ocean of exiled stars not too long ago as an example, even though the other party possessed means far exceeding his expectations, if he wanted to, he would have been able to send out a signal. The fact that Du Qingyuan was unable to do so showed something. The Hall of Gods is an existence that towers over the entire Forsaken Continents. It's an extremely powerful organization that could potentially be under the control of real gods. If there are real gods on the Forsaken Continent, there's no doubt that they would be the strongest existences here. Putting aside Du Qingyuan, even if all 6 sects joined hands with one another, we still wouldn't be able to beat the other party, Han Zhenqiu said. Zhong Xian nodded in agreement. He had never met a god in person, but without a doubt, a real god would surely wield powers far surpassing that of semi-divinity realm cultivators. It would not be too surprising if Du Qingyuan was unable to do anything in the face of a real god. Other than the Hall of Gods, the next most likely person would be none other than the head of the Ethereal Hall. The fact that Hall Master Kong was able to snatch the god character from the Hall of Gods shows that he wields prowess far beyond our imagination. Even if he isn't a god, it's likely that he isn't too far away from them anymore. Zhong Xian nodded. Kongsha's accomplishments on the Forsaken Continent served as evidence to his incredible means. As for the rest, I'm afraid I don't know that much either. Since the Forsaken Continent is the land abandoned by the gods, it's possible that there could still be some surprisingly powerful existences roaming these lands that we don't know about, Han Zhenqiu added. Those words brought a frown to Zhong Xian's forehead. He had never considered such a possibility before. Thinking about it, the Forsaken Continent had been a part of the firmament in the past. Since that was the case, it was not impossible for there to be even more powerful life forms roaming these lands. They continued chatting for a bit longer, and through the conversation, Zhong Xian found out that the Forsaken Continent was far more complicated than he had thought. Shaking his head, he decided not to dwell too much on it and instead asked, "By the way, I heard rumors that I am the sect leader of the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion. May I know what that is about?" With a smile on his lips, Han Zhenqiu explained about the declaration he had made shortly after Zhong Xian's departure. "I see. Zhongxian nodded with a bitter smile on his lips. So, the other party had done it in order to protect him. It was just that it was not working at all. Even after learning that he was the heads of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, the Seven-Star Pavilion, and the Myriad Beasts Hall, the Hall of Gods had still made a move on him without any hesitation. Chapter 2061 Head of 4 Sects. Alright, I'll be taking my leave first. There are still some matters that I need to attend to. After asking everything he wanted to know, Zhongxian quickly left the accommodation of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion and began making his way over to where Elder Qin Yuan was. Hall Master Zheng. Upon seeing Zhongxian, Elder Qin Yuan heaved a sigh of relief. He quickly filled the other party in regarding the details. Having learned of the matter from Han Zhenqiu, Zhongxian was not too surprised by the news. With a contemplative frown on his forehead, he asked, Elder Qin, what's your view on the matter? Since the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion is already allied with Starchaser Palace, I was thinking that we could try allying ourselves with the Seven-Star Pavilion. At the very least, we'll be able to have each other's backs and have more say on issues, Elder Qin Yuan replied. If you don't mind, I can bring you over to meet the newly inaugurated Pavilion Master Liu Yang of the Seven-Star Pavilion. I heard that he's a young genius, so the two of you might be able to get along well with one another. Get along well. Veins popped out on Zhongxian's temples. He would have to suffer from dissociative personality disorder to be able to get along well with himself. Elder Qin Yuan noticed the grim look on Zhongxian's face and proposed, if you aren't too comfortable with the matter, I can postpone the meeting with Pavilion Master Liu. Zhongxian was silent for a moment before slowly nodding. There's no need for that. Let's head over and meet Elder Kue Xiao. It happens that there's something I would like to inform the two of you about. If he wanted to, he was confident that he could continue his disguise for much longer. However, given the forceful measures that the Hall of Gods had used against Starchaser Palace, it was becoming apparent that the 6 sects would have to gather together and coordinate with one another in order to survive this ordeal. So, it was about time for him to reveal his identity as the head of 4 sects. With the stakes he had in 4 sects, he was in a good position to push for an alliance among the 6 sects. The only issue with that was that he was not too certain that these people would be able to take the blow. Sure, let's head over right now. Elder Qin Yuan was not sure what Zhongxian was going to talk about, but the grim look on the latter's face suggested that it was something of the utmost importance. Thus, he quickly led the way forward. The place where the 7-Star Pavilion resided, the Green Fate Quarters, was not too far from the Changyuan gazebo. 5 minutes later, they were already standing right before Elder Kue Xiao and the others. Elder Qin Yuan took one step forward and introduced Zhongxian proudly. This is our new hall master, Zheng Yang. He does look like an outstanding individual. Elder Kue Xiao nodded in agreement. He had been wondering if the new head of the Myriad Beasts Hall might actually be Liu Yang, the new head of their 7-Star Pavilion, in disguise, but from the looks of it now, there was indeed no relations between the two of them. Their pavilion master was currently only at Lesser High Immortal Realm, whereas this Zheng Yang had already reached the Heavenly High Immortal Realm. Furthermore, the latter's foundation seemed to be extremely firm, and he seemed ready to achieve a breakthrough at any moment. May I know where Pavilion Master Liu is at the moment? Elder Qin Yuan asked with a frown. We have already brought our hall master here, so don't you think it's a little rude for your pavilion master not to come out and greet us? We have already sent the message out, so our pavilion master should be returning very soon. I'll have to ask you to wait patiently for a moment, Elder Kue Xiao said. Following that, he took out his communication jade token and began writing on it. Seeing that Elder Kue Xiao had begun sending messages over to Pavilion Master Liu Yang _ Zhongxian flicked his wrist and took out a communication jade token. The communication jade token soon lit up, indicating that there was a message. However, he simply held onto it quietly in his hand, not bothering to check it at all. Elder Kue Xiao swiftly noticed the light flickering on the communication jade token in Zhongxian's hands. Knowing that it would be rude to peek at the other party's private message, he politely said, Hall Master Zheng, it seems like someone is trying to contact you. That does seem to be the case. Zhongxian nodded. Elder Kue, You need not pay me any heed. Feel free to continue sending messages to your pavilion master. I see. All right then. Elder Kue Xiao had no idea what this Hall Master Zheng Yang was trying to pull off. Nevertheless, he continued sending messages to Liu Yang, and surprisingly, the communication jade token in Hall Master Zheng Yang's hand continued glowing brilliantly. This left him feeling deeply perplexed. Thus, he sent 2 more messages and the communication jade token in the other party's hands glowed even more brilliantly. It was almost as if it was resonating with his movements. An ominous feeling arose in Elder Kue Xiao's heart. He gently took the communication jade token that was placed atop Hall Master Zheng Yang's hands and looked at it. His body immediately stiffened. With a doubtful tone in his voice, he called out, "Pavilion Master." Yuan Zhongxian nodded. Putong. Elder Kue Xiao nearly fainted on the spot. His deduction actually turned out to be accurate. Liu Yang was indeed Zheng Yang. You even tried to deny it back then. Elder Qin Yuan was bewildered by the abrupt development. He turned his gaze over and asked, "What's going on? Take a look at this, and you should be able to understand what's going on." Elder Kue Xiao passed his communication jade token together with the one that he had taken from Zhongxian over. Elder Qin Yuan looked at the two, and his body suddenly stiffened on the spot. "Hall Master Zheng. You are actually Liu Yang?" Zhongxian nodded in response, confirming Elder Qin Yuan's doubts. The 2 elders stared at one another for a very long time before bitter smiles emerged on their faces. Eventually, a sigh of resignation escaped their lips. I guess this isn't too bad. After all, the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion and Starchaser Palace have a common leader as well. Such a relationship allows for greater intimacy between 2 sects. Even if chaos befalls the Forsaken Continent, with such a connection between both of our sects, we'll be able to support one another through times of difficulty without any worries, Elder Qin Yuan said. The situation had come to a point where it was impossible for a sect to survive alone. What had happened to Starchaser Palace was a warning to the rest, but even if 2 sects allied with one another, if they could not trust each other, this partnership would be for naught. However, if they centered themselves around a leader who had equal stakes in both sects, they could be assured that there would be no backstabbing or the like. With a tight collaboration between the 2 sects, they would be able to stand their ground against the others. Furthermore, their leader was skilled in both beast taming and battle techniques. With such capabilities, would they have to fear the heavenly true immortal realm Zhongxian? With this, what did they have to fear? Even the Hall of Gods would have to think twice before crossing them. Since that's the case, let's make a declaration to inform the world about our alliance. With this, the others won't dare act so smugly anymore. Elder Kue Xiao remarked with a relieved smile. By making a declaration about their alliance, they would be confirming the stand of both of their sects. This would grant them a greater say when it came to matters concerning the 6 sects. There's no need to send out a declaration. Isn't the inauguration ceremony of sect leader Zhongxian about to begin? Most likely, the other sects will dispatch their top echelons over to witness the ceremony. It'll be much more effective and impactful to announce the news there, Elder Qin Yuan said. The way in which the news was disseminated made a difference as well. If the 2 of them made the announcement right before the top echelons of the 6 sects, the effects would be much more pronounced. That sounds like a good idea. Elder Kue Xiao nodded in agreement. At this moment, the heavy chiming of a bell echoed across Starchaser Island. It's starting. Let's head over now, Elder Kue Xiao said as he stood up. Yuan. Zhongxian had intended to fully explain the matter, but he knew that he was unable to explain the full situation in a moment's time. So, he could only follow the rest into Starchaser Palace quickly. The inauguration of a new palace master for Starchaser Palace was a major affair, so the place was filled with huge crowds of people. Every single one of them was excited to meet the first person on the Forsaken Continent to take over a leadership role in 2 of the 6 sect. In the largest square of Starchaser Palace, there was a high seat that was located right in the middle of the crowd. Han Jianqiu, Kue Xiao, and everyone else were standing in the area with their bodies upright, making the atmosphere look particularly dignified and solemn. I heard that sect leader Zhongxian has comprehended the god's sword intent. Even though his cultivation is only at the heavenly true immortal realm, his fighting prowess is nowhere beneath that of heavenly high immortals. Indeed. Someone who is able to catch the eye of both Han Zhenqiu and Du Qingyuan is bound to possess extraordinary capabilities. I'm interested to see what kind of person he is. There have been many rumors going around regarding him, but Zhongxian remains an elusive figure on the Forsaken Continent. This is probably the first time his coming into public eye. Hushed discussions could be heard beneath. When the news that a single person was going to be the heads of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion and Starchaser Palace, a huge uproar was stirred across the entire Forsaken Continent. Overnight, Zhongxian had become a figure admired by countless citizens. I would like to see if this Zhongxian is more capable than our Hall Master Zheng. Elder Qin Yuan chuckled softly beneath his breath. Later on, after the inauguration ceremony concludes, we'll usher our pavilion master Liu up to announce the fact that he's the head of both of our sects and that both of our sects are going to forge a formal alliance with one another. That news will surely make the jaws of the others fall off, Elder Kuei Xiao said. Just thinking about the bewildered expressions that would appear before him made him want to dance in joy. After all, there was nothing more enjoyable than passing down one's shock to another person. Alternatively, we can have our Hall Master Zheng challenge Zhongxian to a fight. Surely a true immortal realm cultivator won't be a match for him. Elder Qin Yuan smiled. But halfway through his words, he suddenly froze on the spot. Hall Master Zheng, what are you doing? Elder Kuei Xiao turned his head over as well, only to see their pavilion master flying straight for the centermost seat in the square. I was joking when I said that you should challenge him to a duel. This is the inauguration ceremony of Starchaser Palace. We can't afford to cause trouble here. Otherwise, we'll be turning the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion and Starchaser Palace against us. Elder Qin Yuan exclaimed. He was nearly scared out of his wits. He had said those words as a passing remark, but who would have thought that their hall master would take them seriously and actually head right for the centermost seat? That would really incur the wrath of those two sects upon them. It was true that they were confident in their alliance, but still, there was no reason to make the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion and Starchaser Palace their enemies for nothing. What should we do? Elder Qin Yuan turned to look at Elder Kuei Xiao anxiously. What better chance was there to speak of collective responsibility than right now? Calm down. Something doesn't seem to be right over here. Take a look over there. Elder Kuei Xiao was surprised by the happenings as well, but he knew that Zhongxian was not a reckless individual, so he was not as anxious as Elder Qin Yuan. Hearing those words, Elder Qin Yuan quickly looked ahead of him. On the way of heading to the centermost seat, the leader of those two sects swiftly changed into a 20-year-old young man. Who? Sitting down upon the highest seat, the young man emanated an imposing aura that commanded the deference of the crowd before speaking loudly. I am Zhongxian. Looking across the crowd around him imposingly, the young man continued. You can also address me as Zheng Yang or Liu Yang. Zheng Yang? Liu Yang? Aren't those the names of the heads of the Myriad Beasts Hall and Seven-Star Pavilion? Wait a moment, does that mean that he's the head of 4 sects then? In an instant, the surroundings quietened down completely. Chapter 2062 Meeting Wu Chen once more. It was already unbelievable news to them that the head of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion was going to become the leader of the Starchaser Palace as well, but to think that he would announce that he was Zheng Yang and Liu Yang as well. Just what in the world was going on here? The bewildered Han Zhenqiu quickly turned his gaze toward the first elder of the Starchaser Palace, only to see that the latter was utterly taken aback as well. She had no idea what was going on either. He moved his gaze toward Elder Kuei Xiao and Elder Qin Yuan, and the two of them were flabbergasted too. Over the past half a month, the 6 sects had been announcing one after another that they had found suitable successors to take over themselves, and there was a great deal of bragging and fawning that followed suit. But in the end, all of them turned out to be the same person. It felt almost like an extremely bad joke. This. Contrary to the shocked faces all around, Bai Xianxing and Jiyu Zhueyun's faces turned utterly livid upon hearing the news. If those four sects had a common leader, wouldn't that mean that they were going to form a tightly knitted alliance with one another? If so, it wouldn't be that easy to borrow their guardian artifacts anymore. Let's inform Hall Master Kong of the matter. The two of them glanced at one another and nodded slightly. Hall Master Kong had entrusted them with the task to convince the other four sects to accept his deal. They thought that given how attractive the deal was, the others wouldn't hesitate to accept it. After all, there was no sect that would risk lagging behind the others and becoming irrelevant. However, it would be a different matter if the four sects were united by a common head. If that was the case, the bargaining power they had against the other four sects would be greatly reduced. Zhao Yu, Han Zhenqiu, Qin Yuan, and Kuei Xiao, I need the four of you to follow me. As the inauguration ceremony came to an end, Zhong Xian listed the names of these four figures before gesturing them toward a guest room not too far away. Sect leader, you are really Zheng Yang and Liu Yang? Han Zhenqiu asked agitatedly. Zhong Xian nodded in response. Han Zhenqiu and Zhao Yu stared at one another. They could hardly believe what they had just heard. The same went for Kuei Xiao and Qin Yuan as well. It took a long while for everyone digested this shocking fact. Elder Kuei Xiao was the first one to speak up after the prolonged silence. This isn't necessarily something bad. At the very least, I think we can all agree that there's a greater threat ahead of us, and there's a need for us to stand together in order to overcome this crisis. If Zhong Xian can become the binding factor that pulls us together, we'll be in a much stronger position than before. Zhong Xian nodded slowly before adding on, the Hall of Gods has already attempted to assassinate me thrice, and they have openly made a move on the Starchaser Palace and Palace Master Do as well. I don't know what the Hall of Gods is up to, but one thing is clear, they aren't going to remain as spectators anymore. Things could go horribly if we were to continue standing divided at a time like this. Thus, I hope that our four sects could combine our forces and advance and retreat alongside one another. He didn't have much interest in accruing power, but even an outsider like him could sense that a storm was brewing in the background. If the six sects were to continue acting independently of one another, it would only be a matter of time before they were destroyed one after another. You have been assassinated thrice. The crowd turned to look at Zhong Xian with shocked looks on their faces. So, Zhong Xian quickly explained the happenings that had caused him to be assassinated those 3 times. In an instant, the eyes of the crowd widened in disbelief. They would have never imagined that the lofty Hall of Gods would be so persistent in attempting to claim a person's life. It actually went to the extent of dispatching a semi-divinity realm expert in order to deal with him. What was even more unbelievable was that the young man was actually able to survive their assassination attempts and even subdue the enemies that had come for him. One must know that even they would have trouble dealing with the warriors of the Hall of Gods. It seemed like the young man was far stronger than they had thought. Hall Master Zheng, you mentioned earlier that you have tamed 4 semi-divinity realm beasts. Elder Qin Yuan asked. Zhong Xian had briefly talked about the blackback tortoise and the 3 sharks earlier in his explanation. For many years, the Myriad Beasts Hall had never been able to tame a semi-divinity realm beast, but within such a short span of time, Zhong Xian actually managed to tame 4 of them by himself. Was this for real? Yes, they are all from the Ocean of Exiled Stars, Zhong Xian replied. With a thought, he summoned the blackback tortoise and the 3 sharks out, and a powerful aura immediately suffused the entire room. This is... Everyone narrowed their eyes in astonishment. With glowing eyes, Han Zhenqiu muttered excitedly, if that's the case, wouldn't that mean that our alliance consists of the forces of the Ocean of Exiled Stars as well? You're right. The crowd widened their eyes in realization. The Hall of Gods was an existence that had towered over the Forsaken Continent for many years. Even with the combined prowess of their 4 sects, they still weren't confident of victory. However, it would be a different matter if they had the aquatic creatures of the ocean with them as well. The ocean was vast and expanse, and the life forms that existed within it were countless. Put together, they would be able to form a power that was greater than that of any of the sects on land. If they could tap into this power effectively, it would be equivalent to having the entire 6 sects or even more behind them. The 3 sharks have already managed to unite most of the ocean together. They have several hundred heavenly high immortal realm aquatic creatures directly under their command, and once the order is issued, they would swiftly rally the entire ocean to launch a decisive strike. Zhongxian replied. Shark One was intending to build an underwater empire, and it had pretty much managed to pull most of the major powers in the ocean over to its side during the meeting at the cavern back then. Once it gave its order, the entire ocean would move together. Realizing that they were far more powerful than they had thought, they couldn't help but look at the young man before them in deference. While they did require a leader figure to unite the sects together in this period of turmoil, they were still worried that someone as young as Zhongxian would be unable to do the job well. After all, there were still some differences among, and they would need someone decisive and powerful to keep each of the sects in check. However, it turned out that Zhongxian possessed the strength of a semi-divinity realm cultivator himself, and he had 4 semi-divinity realm beasts and 2 semi-divinity artifacts with him. On top of that, he had the entire ocean backing him as well. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that his influence was comparable to even that of Hall Master Kong. With such might under his command, only a fool would attempt to turn against the alliance and risk getting on the bad side of Zhongxian. Pavilion Master Liu, the Azure Bridge is about to descend soon. It's about time for us to head to the heaven anchoring boulder. As the head of 4 sects, how do you think we should allocate the slots? Elder Kuei Xiao asked. Their initial thought was to have their respective heads challenge the Azure Bridge, but as it turned out, their 4 heads were actually a single person. In other words, they suddenly had 3 additional slots. I'll be using the Starchaser Palace's slot. As for the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, 7-Star Pavilion, and the Myriad Beasts Hall, you will each nominate a qualified candidate to accompany me onto the Azure Bridge, Zhongxian said. The reason why he made such a decision was because the Starchaser Palace had acquired the Godblood, which meant that they possessed the means to produce semi-divinity realm cultivators. In fact, aside from Du Qingyuan, there was already another one in the sect at the moment. As such, the Starchaser Palace wasn't as desperate as the other sects. That shouldn't be too difficult, but the only issue is that the warriors of the Hall of Gods are too powerful. Currently, we don't have any candidates that stand a good chance of surviving against them, Han Zhenqiu said with a deep frown. After all, if the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, Myriad Beasts Hall, and 7-Star Pavilion had a reliable candidate to count on, they wouldn't have gone to the extent of nominating an outsider whom they had just met as their new head. It was true that they could simply push new candidates forward to fill up the additional slots, but if the candidate stood no chance at success at all, that would be no different from pushing them to their deaths. Zhongxian pondered deeply for a moment before saying, "Choose your candidates and send them to me. I'll teach them personally." There isn't much time before the Azure Bridge descends, but as long as they put in their all into learning, I believe that they will still be able to stand a chance. It might be last-minute preparations, but that didn't mean that it was meaningless. Especially since he was the one doing the teaching over here. Putting aside his deep understanding of battle techniques and cultivation techniques, having fought the warriors of the Hall of Gods on multiple occasions, he was probably the person of the 6 sects who boasted the greatest understanding of their fighting style. After that, Zhongxian continued laying out some of the future directions regarding the 4 sects. While he wasn't interested in dealing with such matters, that didn't mean that he didn't have the ability to do so if he wanted to. He was, after all, the man who had stood at the very zenith of the master-teacher continent, and the innumerable books he had browsed through had built on his knowledge. He could offer deeper insights and newer perspectives in certain matters, thus allowing better decisions to be made. The 4 elders had initially wondered if he was too young to take on such a role, but the maturity and alacrity in his thoughts left them feeling deeply impressed. The ideas that he proposed were considered from multiple perspectives, and every single one of them was very intentional in their outcome. If they were to follow Zhongxian's directives, the 4 sects would become more deeply integrated with one another, allowing them to support one another in their growth. With time, they would truly gain the strength to stand independently and oppose the Hall of Gods. After drafting up the future plans for the 4 sects, Zhongxian took out dozens of jade tokens and passed them over. Here is a set of cultivation techniques from Ancient Sage to High Immortal that I have modified from your existing cultivation techniques. Feel free to impart it to qualified disciples, it should allow them to advance their cultivation swiftly. He had studied the cultivation techniques of the 4 sects and modified them accordingly. While these cultivation techniques weren't simplified heaven's path divine art, they were indeed much stronger than what the disciples of the sects were cultivating at the moment. It should prove to be invaluable in enhancing the fighting prowess of the individual sects. The 4 elders took the jade tokens over, and after taking a look at the contents, they fell utterly silent. A moment later, their shoulders began to tremble. The cultivation techniques which Zhongxian had come up with was truly a work of ingenuity. If they were to pass it down to their disciples, it could be foreseen that the overall strength of their sects would surge like bamboo shoots after a spring rain. The Black Mirror Citadel and Evanescent Immortal sect would be the ones who were left behind instead. That's all for now. Let's hurry up and get on with what has to be done for now. Zhongxian dismissed the group with a wave of his hand. The elders quickly left the room. After their departure, Zhongxian couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. The elders were aware of the dangers lurking in the Forsaken Continent at the moment, so they knew the importance of uniting together. As such, they were still willing to acknowledge him as their sect leader. However, it would be difficult to convince the disciples of the matter. After all, they were not privy to the confidential secrets of the continent, and to them, the honor and pride of their sect came before everything else. Thus, he would have to resort to other means in order to win them over to his side. And through passing these cultivation techniques down, not only would he be proving his strength to the disciples, he was also painting a bright future of where the new heights that their sect would reach under his leadership. That would help stabilize his current shaky position. Gia. The door suddenly opened at this moment, and an adolescent youth walked into the room. Young master, the adolescent youth bowed down and cried out. Wu Chen, you are fine. Zhongxian's eyes lit up in agitation. The person who had just entered the room was no other than the ex-sovereign Chen Yong of the Master-Teacher Continent. Who could have thought that Du Qingyuan would really manage to save him and even forge a new body for him? Yes, young master. I managed to survive. Wu Chen replied with reddened eyes. Despite the conflicts between the otherworldly demonic tribe and the human race on the Master-Teacher Continent, there was no doubt that this young man had saved him on many occasions. How are you feeling at the moment? Have you managed to recover your cultivation yet? Zhongxian asked. Taking a look at Wu Chen, he surprisingly found that he was unable to see through the latter's cultivation at all. Yes, I'm fine right now. After Palace Master Du brought me here, she used an invaluable artifact to forge my body, and she even bestowed me with a droplet of god blood. As such, not only have I managed to recover from my injuries, I was even able to advance my cultivation all the way to semidivinity realm. Wu Chen swiftly went through the happenings after he arrived at the Forsaken Continent. After that, he released his aura, fully showcasing his might as a semidivinity. Back when he was still on the Master-Teacher Continent, Luo Ruoxin had imparted him with a disguise technique. As such, even though his cultivation had already reached semidivinity realm, unless he were to willingly reveal his own aura, no one would be able to discern the extent of his strength. Chapter 2063 The Key to Achieving a Breakthrough to Semidivinity. Zhongxian was shocked. When Wu Chen was brought away by Palace Master Du, his cultivation was only at Ancient Sage 3 Dan consummation. He was still some way off from reaching Dimension Shatterer realm. Who could have thought that within such a short period of time, he would actually rise straight to the top? It seemed like Palace Master Du wasn't making empty promises. She really fulfilled his request and did it to the best of her abilities. You have been following Palace Master Du all this while? Zhongxian asked. As there was a time difference between the two worlds, the date which Wu Chen had arrived on the Forsaken Continent wasn't too much ahead of him. That's right, Wu Chen replied as he suppressed his cultivation once more. A few days ago, we received news that you have managed to become the head of the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion, so Palace Master Du and I went over to look for you. The two of you tried looking for me? Zhongxian was stunned. Wu Chen quickly filled Zhongxian in on the details. After hearing the entire story, Zhongxian could only shake his head bitterly. He didn't think that he would miss Du Qingyuan just like that. But again, he didn't know that Du Qingyuan was the deity whom Wu Chen had summoned back then, so there was no way he would have known that she would have come for him. With a deep sigh, Zhongxian continued asking, "Since you were by Palace Master Du's side all along, do you have any news regarding Luo Ruoxin?" If there was anyone other than Du Qingyuan who knew anything about Luo Ruoxin in the Forsaken Continent, it would definitely be Wu Chen. Wu Chen was the one who summoned Luo Ruoxin to the Master-Teacher Continent back then, and he was the one who had accompanied her on her journey all along too. "Milady has already returned to the firmament," Wu Chen replied. "She's the spirit god of the firmament, and she returned to the world she belongs to after acquiring what she needed from the Master-Teacher Continent. Based on what I know, Milady sustained significant injuries when she was descending to the Azure. The dimension barrier between the firmament and the Forsaken Continent is simply too resilient, such that she isn't able to freely move across the dimensions despite being the revered spirit god. She needed someone to summon her from the Forsaken Continent in order to overcome the barrier. Back then, Palace Master Du and I summoned her simultaneously from the Forsaken Continent and the Master-Teacher Continent in order to allow her to descend from the firmament. Unfortunately, the dimension barrier was far stronger than we thought, and she ended up sustaining severe injuries on the way down. It was also then that Palace Master Du acquired the god blood which she used in order to allow me to achieve a breakthrough to semi-divinity realm, Wu Chen explained. It was roughly the same as what he had deduced when he heard the story from Shark One as well. "Do you know what's her motive for heading to the Master-Teacher Continent?" Zhongxian asked. Even with his current strength, he was still unable to break through the current dimension barrier to descend to the Master-Teacher Continent, let alone the fact that Luo Ruoxin was breaking through two dimension barriers at one. The difficulty in doing so was truly unimaginable. Just what in the world would have prompted her to go to such lengths, even sustaining such severe injuries in the process? "I don't really know for sure, but it seems to be related to the Great Codex of Spring and Autumn," Wu Chen replied. Zhongxian wasn't too convinced by that. The Great Codex of Spring and Autumn is indeed powerful, but it shouldn't warrant her to go to such lengths for it. The Great Codex of Spring and Autumn was indubitably one of the most valuable treasures of the Master-Teacher Continent. However, there were already treasures that were on par with it on the Forsaken Continent, let alone the firmament. The fact that Luo Ruoxin was able to pass through two-dimension barriers simultaneously hinted at her unfathomable cultivation. For someone of her caliber to go that far for a treasure that couldn't even be considered to be powerful by her standards. That really didn't make sense at all. I don't know the details either. I asked about it back then as well, and Milady said that there was someone whom she wanted to deal with. That person wields incredible means that she has trouble coping with, so she had to acquire the treasure at all costs in order to decipher his skills. Wu Chen pondered for a moment before replying. Zhongxian frowned. The Great Codex of Spring and Autumn was an artifact that controlled space and time. Could it be that the person whom Luo Ruoxin wanted to deal with specialized in the laws of space-time? I dared not to probe any deeper than that. A mortal like me is unqualified to learn the secrets of the gods, Wu Chen added with a hint of respect in his voice. Then, do you know of any way I could contact her? Palace Master Du is able to establish a connection link with the firmament through the altar of the Starchaser Palace. However, it will take a lot of offerings in order to do so, and it's not guaranteed whether we'll be able to reach Milady or not, Wu Chen replied. Altar. A glint flashed across Zhongxian's eyes. Thinking back, the reason why the Hall of Gods made a move on the Starchaser Palace first was probably to prevent Du Qingyuan from using the altar to inform the spirit god about their movements. Perhaps, the Hall of Gods didn't want the gods of the firmament to learn of their movements. In any case, he would have to quickly find the missing Du Qingyuan and the altar. Wait a moment, is it possible for the Hall of Gods to get into contact with the firmament then? Zhongxian asked. Given that the Hall of Gods was to existence closest to the firmament on the Forsaken Continent, they might just be able to establish a connection link with the firmament. In fact, there were some rumors that it guarded the gateway leading to the firmament. However, Wu Chen simply shook his head to express that he wasn't too sure about the matter. Other than the centennial descent of the Azure Bridge, the Hall of Gods rarely appeared in the Forsaken Continent. As such, there was very little that was known about it. Zhongxian continued asking a few more questions, But because it hadn't been too long since Wu Chen had come here, he didn't know too much either. Forget it. The Azure Bridge is about to descend, and most likely, I should be able to find the answers I seek there. Zhong Xian thought. Until now, he still had no idea why the Hall of Gods was so determined to capture him, but he had a feeling that everything would be unraveled at the Azure Bridge. That would be their last chance to strike, after all. Otherwise, once he successfully achieved a breakthrough to semi-divinity realm, putting aside the Hall of Gods, even this world wouldn't be able to confine him any longer. By then, the tables would be turned, and he would become the one hunting down the Hall of Gods instead. Knowing how important it was for him to acquire greater strength, Zhong Xian immersed his consciousness into the Library of Heaven's Path, where the chamber made out of the Great Codex of Spring and Autumn was at, and continued to decipher a plausible semi-divinity realm cultivation technique for himself. Half a day later, the 3 candidates from the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, Myriad Beasts Hall, and 7-Star Pavilion were brought before him. They were all beneath 100 years old, but their cultivation had already reached heavenly high immortal realm. Elder Hong Wu of the 7-Star Pavilion was amongst the 3 candidates too. You called us? Other than Elder Hong Wu, the other 2 were assessing Zhong Xian with a sharp gaze in their eyes. They had heard that this young man had become the head of the 4 sects, but they couldn't help but wonder if he truly had the capabilities and credentials to take on such a role. 10 breaths. Use all means at your disposal to make me take half a step backward. If you are able to do so, you will still have a chance at defeating the warriors of the Hall of Gods. Zhong Xian placed his hands behind his back and said, You want us to push you half a step back? The trio was a little perplexed. Given that they were of the same cultivation realm, even if Zhong Xian's comprehension of swordsmanship and battle techniques were above theirs, as long as they worked together, they should be more than capable of pushing him half a step back. Indeed, Zhong Xian replied. However, if you can't even make me take half a step back, I want the 3 of you to cultivate however I tell you to prior to the descent of the Azure Bridge. I will not tolerate any complaints or whining at all. The fact that the 3 of them were chosen by the 3 elders to challenge the Azure Bridge meant that they were decently skilled. However, if they were to be complacent with their current abilities and refused to heed his instructions, it was unlikely that they would be a match for the warriors of the Hall of Gods. There was only one way to swiftly win them over and make them heed him instructions, beating them into submission. If we still aren't any match for you even with our prowess combined, you can be assured that we'll heed your commands without any complaint. As candidates to the Azure Bridge, they were potential successors to the leadership position in their respective sects, but the sudden appearance of this young man had dashed their hopes. It would be a lie if they were to say that they didn't harbor a grudge toward the young man. Boom. Right after those words were spoken, the trio made their move simultaneously. Elder Hong Wu channeled his strength into a palm and executed his strongest battle technique. The genius from the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion brandished his sword furiously, executing an incredibly powerful sword art. As for the genius from the Myriad Beasts Hall, he decisively brought out his tamed beasts, heavenly high immortal realm black tiger beast twins. Watching the moves of the 3 youths before him, Zhong Xian chuckled softly. In terms of fighting prowess, they could indeed be considered to be above average. However, compared to the warriors of the Hall of Gods, they were still severely lacking. Even he was nearly done in by the warriors of the Hall of Gods. It would take more than above average to deal with that lot of fellows. Without drawing his sword, Zhong Xian simply waved his hand lightly, and the 3 of them immediately felt as if they had been plunged into an endless desert. No matter where they tried to head to, they weren't able to escape from this desert. Then, Zhong Xian brought his palm down lightly. Pada. A sword collapsed to the ground, a battle technique was dissipated, and 2 immortal beasts groaned in pain. Just like that, the 3 geniuses collapsed to the ground, completely helpless before the absolute might before them. How could a heavenly high immortal be so powerful? The lips of the trio quivered in disbelief. As fellow heavenly high immortals, they thought that even if Zhong Xian was stronger than them, it wouldn't be too much. But after crossing blows, they realized that the difference in their strength was in the order of magnitude. Even their semi-divinity realm ex-leaders might not necessarily be a match for the young man before them. Do you admit defeat? Zhong Xian asked with a smile. We admit defeat. With this single blow, Zhongxian crushed their complacency and won their respect. These are the cultivation techniques I have created based on your cultivation. As long as you practice it diligently, you should be able to raise your fighting prowess significantly within 3 days. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me. Zhongxian took out 3 jade tokens and infused his thoughts into them before passing them over to the trio. The trio took the jade tokens, and after browsing through the contents, they found themselves shocked beyond words. Don't waste this opportunity one have given you, Zhongxian said before dismissing them. Once they had left, he immersed his consciousness back into the library of Heaven's Path and continued studying the way he could advance to semi-divinity realm. In the history of the Forsaken Continent, there were many experts who had attempted to push for a breakthrough to semi-divinity realm, and a huge number of them had penned down their precious experiences and insights regarding it. It was just a pity that it was impossible for anyone to reach the realm without challenging the Azure Bridge. Most likely, there must be some quality lacking in the atmosphere of the Forsaken Continent that prevents one from reaching semi-divinity realm. Zhongxian arrived at an answer. It was not that the cultivators on the Forsaken Continent were lacking in talent. The situation was actually very similar to why cultivators on the Master-Teacher Continent were no longer able to reach Ancient Sage. He suddenly remembered Elder Kue Xiao mentioning the aura of divinity a while back to him. If Zhongxian's guess was right, the God character contained the aura of divinity which a cultivator required to overcome the final hurdle and reach semi-divinity realm. It was likely for this reason that the ethereal hall was able to nurture semi-divinity realm cultivators without challenging the Azure Bridge, while it was the vice versa for the other sects. Chapter 2064 Heaven Anchoring Boulder. Coming up with one's own cultivation technique was no easy feat. There were simply too many aspects to consider, and even the most minor of details could make the greatest difference. As such, it was not something that could be accomplished in the short term. Knowing this as well, Zhongxian had no intention of rushing the process. Several days passed by quickly, and soon, it was time for the descent of the Azure Bridge. Early in the morning, Zhongxian led a large group of people toward where the Heaven Anchoring Boulder was at. The Heaven Anchoring Boulder was located not too far away from Starchaser Island. Riding on the blackback tortoise, it took them roughly 4 hours before a massive boulder-like island came into sight. This boulder-like island rose from the depths of the water like a massive pillar surging into the sky. It was impossible to see the ends of it at a single glance. Legend has it that the heavens have once collapsed countless years ago, resulting in a huge catastrophe for the life forms on the Forsaken Continent. In the face of this crisis, a powerful expert severed the 4 limbs of a humongous tortoise and used them as pillars to prop up the heavens. As time went by, the 4 limbs slowly hardened to become rocks, turning into what we currently see before us, Han Zhenqiu remarked as he looked at the towering pillar ahead of him. That is nothing more than a legend. This island is least tens of thousands of meters high. How could there be such a massive tortoise in the world? Elder Kue Xiao shook his head. Besides, if the heavens were to really collapse, there is no way the mere limbs of a tortoise would be able to prevent them from falling. Indeed. The crowd chuckled slightly. Every world had its own legends and folklores. Those stories were crafted to make sense out of the seeming aberrance in nature, and the Forsaken Continent was no exception either. Zhongxian took a closer look at the Heaven Anchoring Boulder. He knew that it was nigh impossible for the pillar to actually be the 4 limbs of a tortoise, but nevertheless, it was indeed bizarre for a structure this tall to remain standing over so many years. Zhongxian activated his eye of insight to examine it closely, and soon, he noticed that something was amiss about it. At first glance, it would appear that the Heaven Anchoring Boulder was nothing more than an ordinary rock structure, but its surface was densely filled with formation inscriptions. It was these inscriptions that allowed it to survive the batter of the wind and erosion of the ocean, thus surviving across the ages. What profound formation inscriptions! To his astonishment, Zhongxian actually found that he was unable to decipher these formation inscriptions even with his current mastery of formations. This is the place that bridges the Forsaken Continent to the Hall of Gods? Zhongxian asked. That's right, Han Zhenqiu nodded in response. As the group chatted with one another, They began ascending up the towering pillar through circling it like a spiral. As their altitude increased, Zhongxian found the pressure weighing down on his body growing heavier and heavier. It was as if there was a massive hand above trying to push him back to the ground, preventing him from exploring the secrets of the heavens. Seeing the faces of the heavenly high immortals turning pale, Han Zhenqiu shouted, "Everyone, make sure to hold on. Ascending the heaven-anchoring boulder is part of the trial as well." Such pressure meant nothing to a semi-divinity realm expert, but to heavenly high immortals, it was still a relatively difficult obstacle for them to overcome. The purpose of it was to sieve out the eligible candidates. That being said, the candidates who were chosen by the 6 sects to represent them were usually able to overcome this obstacle, albeit with a little bit of difficulty. It's rather similar to the Temple of Confucius, Zhongxian thought with a reminiscent smile. The pressure above was indeed a little stifling, but it was nowhere enough to make him halt his movements. He had encountered something similar at the Temple of Confucius back then. There was a crushing pressure from the sky that prevented cultivators from flying up high. High immortals were more than capable of flying tens of thousands of meters, but the heaven-anchoring boulder was filled with unique inscriptions that formed a formation of its own, hindering cultivators that attempted to scale it. Pu. While Zhongxian was deep in thoughts, the sound of someone spurting blood suddenly echoed in the air. Turning his head around, he saw an elder of the 7-star pavilion succumbing to the pressure and falling down. "We aren't even at half of the distance yet. Elder Kue Xiao, it seems like the elders of your sects are getting weaker over time," Elder Qin Yuan chuckled softly. On the other hand, instead of responding to Elder Qin Yuan's remark, Elder Kue Xiao simply glanced downward with a deep frown on his forehead. After falling some distance, the elder managed to regain his balance. He anxiously gasped for air as he looked upward with a fearful look in his eyes, not daring to climb any higher. As a high immortal capable of flight, it was extremely unlikely the elder would have fallen to his death. It was just that no one expected him to be unable to even reach the halfway mark. Those who were qualified to become elders were usually the experts of the sect, and by past experience, even the weakest elder should have been able to fly up to 70% of the distance before succumbing. Pu. While everyone was still harboring some doubts in their mind, yet another elder spurted a mouthful of blood and fell from the sky. It was an elder from the Myriad Beasts Hall this time around. "You." Elder Qin Yuan's face turned livid. Barely after he mocked the 7-star pavilion's elder for being weak, an elder from his Myriad Beasts Hall ended up falling as well. It was almost as if karma had come back around to bite him. "The pressure from the heaven-anchoring boulder is greater than usual," Han Zhenqiu remarked solemnly. Elder Kue Xiao and Elder Qin Yuan quickly perceived their surroundings, and their eyebrows shot up right after. "You're right." As semi-divinity realm experts, they weren't too affected by the pressure coming from the heaven-anchoring boulder, so they didn't pay it much heed. However, now that they were taking a closer look, they realized to their astonishment that the pressure was actually twofold of what it should have been. Under normal circumstances, the pressure would only reach such a level at the 70% mark of the heaven-anchoring boulder. The trial of the heaven-anchoring boulder has never changed for the past several thousand years. Why would an anomaly only start happening now? Elder Qin Yuan murmured in disbelief. "It must have something to do with why the Azure Bridge is descending in advance as well," Han Zhenqiu said contemplatively. "No matter what it is, it's a fact that the heaven-anchoring boulder is far more dangerous than what it used to be. You must make sure to gather your focus and don't let your guard down. Only by scaling up the heaven-anchoring boulder will you be qualified to challenge the Azure Bridge and reach semi-divinity realm. Such a chance will not come twice for you." Elder Kue Xiao turned to the candidates and instructed grimly. Due to the rules of the Azure Bridge, all cultivators would only be able to take on the trial once in their life. If they were to fail here, they would be doomed to never reach semi-divinity realm. "We understand." Knowing the severity of the matter, the group dared not to take things lightly anymore. With focused looks on their faces, they continued scaling up the heaven-anchoring boulder. However, the number of victims only continued to rise as they flew higher and higher. Members of their groups fell one after another. By the time they reached the 70% mark, there were less than 20 of them left. The three candidates who were going to challenge the Azure Bridge alongside Zhongxian had undergone special training over the past few days, causing their fighting prowess to rise significantly. If not for that, it was likely that they would have already caved in by now too. Zhongxian turned to the three candidates behind him and saw that their clothes were drenched with sweat. With a solemn voice, he asked, "Are you still able to hold on?" "Yes, we'll hold on no matter what happens," Elder Hong Wu said with gritted teeth. So, the group continued to advance forward. By the time they reached the 80% mark, only Elder Kue Xiao, Elder Qin Yuan, Han Zhenqiu, Zhongxian, and the three candidates were left. While Elder Qin Yuan and the others were still able to move leisurely due to their superior strength, Elder Hong Wu and the others were already reaching their limits. Their bodies were trembling non-stop, and their limbs seemed to have turned limp due to the immense pressure. They felt like they would fall from the sky at any moment. Will they really be unable to even scale up the heaven-anchoring boulder? Zhongxian thought with a frown. There was still a distance of several thousand meters ahead of them, but they weren't able to hold on anymore. At this rate, there was no way they could persevere till the Azure Bridge. It seemed like he had underestimated the Hall of Gods once more. "The three of you, wait here. I'll be heading up in advance to see what has happened for the pressure to have grown so strong." Zhongxian turned to the three candidates and instructed. Even if he were to train them on the spot, it was still unlikely that they would be able to grow strong enough to reach the top. Since that was the case, the only thing he could do to help them was to try to alleviate the source of the pressure. Thus, he sped up and rushed up the heaven-anchoring pillar, and the pressure around him swiftly grew more and more intense. It was to the extent that the air around him was starting to become frighteningly viscous. So, he began to channel his god's sword intent around his body, morphing into a sharp sword. Voila! He tore right through the viscous air around him, and with a swift upward dive, he landed on the very top of the heaven-anchoring boulder. The top consisted of a flat platform that was roughly 100 meters in diameter. There was nothing on it at all. The sky above was completely pitch black, and the so-called Hall of Gods was nowhere to be seen. Keeping up the platform, Zhongxian tried to venture into higher grounds, but he swiftly found himself hitting onto a ceiling. Rather than calling it a ceiling, it might be more accurate to describe it as the boundary of the world. No matter how he drove his zhenqi, he was unable to bypass it. In other words, he was unable to reach the Hall of Gods by himself given his current cultivation. So, he returned back to the top of the heaven-anchoring boulder and took a look around the area. He found that the ground was also filled with the same inscriptions along the sides of the boulder too. As long as I resolve the inscriptions, the pressure should disappear, right? Even though Zhongxian couldn't completely understand the meaning behind the inscriptions, it was most likely the reason why the heaven-anchoring boulder was still standing even after many millennia. The chances were that the pressure that was weighing down on everyone originated from the inscriptions as well. Go! With a flick of his wrist, Zhongxian took out the Tongzhang sword and directed it right toward the inscriptions. A furious outpour of sword qi gushed out like a ferocious dragon, swirling around the peak before eventually diving right into the inscriptions. Wang! A brilliant light flickered from the top of the platform, as if something had been brought to life. As expected, the pressure in the surroundings changed along with the flickering of the light, proving Zhongxian's deduction. So, he decisively brought out 9 more heavenly high immortal tier swords and formed a unique sword formation around him. Break! Zhongxian infused the god's sword intent into the 10 swords before ordering them to wreak havoc all around the platform. While he didn't know the exact meaning behind those inscriptions, through his eye of insight, he was still able to decipher the flaws in the formation. Naturally, those were also the exact spots that were devastated by his swords too. Boom! With a bright outburst of light, the massive pressure in the air abruptly vanished with a pop. Hoo! A huge gust of wind echoed from beneath as Han Zhenqiu and the others made use of this opportunity to rush upward and get onto the peak of the boulder. Wang! Barely after everyone arrived, the destroyed inscriptions swiftly reformed, and the overwhelming pressure began crushing down on the surroundings once more. It had only been 2 breaths since the moment the pressure disappeared to the moment it reappeared. If not for the crowd moving swiftly, they wouldn't have been able to make it up here in time. These inscriptions actually have the ability to self-repair. Zhong Xian was shocked. He thought that the formation would be completely ruined after his devastation, but who could have thought that it would be able to revert back so quickly? As expected of the doorstep leading to the Hall of Gods, it was indeed not ordinary at all. Chapter 2065 by Xiansheng Wants Vengeance. The pressure in the surroundings had been overwhelming while they were climbing the heaven-anchoring boulder, but once they reached the top, the pressure was reduced significantly. Elder Hong Wu and the other two candidates immediately slumped onto the floor weakly. They had to push themselves to their limits in order to reach the top. So, they quickly swallowed some pills in order to recover their strength. On the other hand, Han Zhenqiu and the rest took a look around them with complicated emotions in their gazes. Many years ago, they had been here too. They had to put their lives on the line and undergo a life-and-death battle before they managed to climb to their current heights. "Where's the Azure Bridge and the Hall of Gods?" Zhong Xian asked. The entire area was barren, and there were no signs of the so-called Azure Bridge or Hall of Gods to be seen. "The Azure Bridge is right above us. When the time arrives, it'll descend and become the connection point between the Hall of Gods and the heaven-anchoring boulder. All those who are of 100 years old and below would be able to step onto the Azure Bridge and challenge the warriors of the Hall of Gods guarding the pathway." Han Zhenqiu pointed upward as he spoke. Zhong Xian lifted his gaze and looked into the sky of deep darkness, but there was nothing to be seen at all. Unless the Azure Bridge descends, it's impossible for a person to set foot onto the Hall of Gods. That's because it's impossible for any cultivator to breach the Azure Barrier. The Azure Barrier is something left behind by the gods, so not even semi-divinity realm cultivators like us are able to phase it at all, Han Zhenqiu said. As if to prove his point, he gathered his sword qi at the tip of his finger and stabbed upward. This simple move harnessed his full strength and his deep understanding of swordsmanship. It gushed forward with the deep rumbling of thunder, almost as if a roaring current was charging forth. But barely after it traveled 10 meters upward, it abruptly dissipated with a light pop. It disappeared so quickly and easily that it almost seemed as if it had never existed before. Zhong Xian's eyebrows shot up in astonishment. If even an attack of full might from Han Zhenqiu was unable to breach the Azure Barrier, he would stand even less of a chance to do so. Despite the powerful pressure coming from the heaven-anchoring boulder, there are still many cultivators on the Forsaken Continent who are able to make their way up here. Most heavenly high immortals, when they were going to reach the end of their lifespan, would visit this area in hopes that they would be able to change their fate. However, not once had anyone succeeded before. As time went by, no one bothered coming over here anymore, Elder Kue Xiao added on. Since it was nothing more than a futile attempt, most cultivators thought that it would be more worth it to spend their remaining time accompanying their family members instead. After all, every second they had left of their remaining life was incredibly precious. Zhong Xian raised his head once more. Even though he was unable to see the ends of the Azure Barrier set up by the gods, he could still feel an overpowering pressure coming from above. This pressure was one that he wasn't confident that he could overcome even if he were to reach semi-divinity realm like the rest. The Azure Barrier induced a feeling of helplessness within him, reminiscent of a mortal standing before a god. Even if he were to use every means at his disposal, he still wouldn't be able to move the barrier at all. An ant would simply never be able to shake a tree. This is the strength of the gods. Zhong Xian thought in alarm. It was no wonder why the Hall of Gods was able to remain a supreme existence which none could shake. Just this barrier was more than enough to destroy anyone's confidence. It was truly a wonder how the founder of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion and Kong Shi managed to overcome its trials. I must say that I'm really surprised that you are able to come up here. While Zhong Xian's mind was wandering about, a cold sneer suddenly echoed in the air. Turning around, they saw the Black Mirror Citadels by Xiansheng and the evanescent immortal sects Jiyu Zhueyun flew up from below. Two middle-aged men quickly followed behind them. They were probably the geniuses participating in the Azure Bridge's trial. The lot of you are able to withstand the pressure? Elder Qin Yuan frowned. All of the heavenly high immortals in their groups were unable to proceed on any further from the 80% marks onward. It was only due to Zhongxian heading forward and halting the pressure for 2 breaths that they were finally able to make their way up. Given so, how did the 2 geniuses from the Black Mirror Citadel and Evanescent Immortal sect manage to get up so easily? When did the disciples from those 2 sects become so powerful? Of course. Such level of pressure means nothing to our geniuses. Bai Xiansheng harumphed smugly. Barely after those words were spoken, Zhongxian's voice sounded in the air, "It's their armor." The crowd quickly turned to the 2 middle-aged men to take a closer look, and they realized that the pitch-black armor on them was exceptionally eye-catching. There were some bizarre patterns inscribed on their armor that somewhat resembled the inscriptions on the heaven-anchoring boulder. It was due to the armor that allowed them to remain impervious to the pressure coming from the heaven-anchoring boulder. Hearing Zhongxian's words, Bai Zhuangsheng took a deep look at him before remarking sarcastically, as expected of the great sect leader Zhong. Paying no heed to Bai Xuansheng's provocation, Zhongxian turned to take a closer look at the 2 geniuses. Even though the 2 middle-aged men were at the same cultivation realm as Elder Hongwu and the others, their auras felt much sharper and imposing, almost reminiscent to that of the warriors of the Hall of Gods. Zhongxian thought with a frown. There were some differences, of course, but the feeling that they gave him was still strikingly similar to that of the warriors from the Hall of Gods. Since sect leader Zhong has such discerning eyes, may I trouble you to point out the culprit who stole my treasures back at the Sea of Little Mirror? Bai Xiansheng continued on with a wintry voice. Zhongxian turned to look at Bai Xiansheng and said calmly, "You were about to be killed by the blackback tortoise when Elder Kue Xiao and I saved your life. However, we aren't saints either. Given that we have saved your life, isn't it right for you to compensate us for our service?" Bai Xuansheng's eyes immediately narrowed menacingly. He had a feeling that Zhongxian was involved in the matter as well, and to be honest, he didn't think that they would admit to it. After all, it wasn't a very honorable action. Yet, who could have thought that the young man would actually admit to it so openly? After stealing my possessions, you still dare to talk about it so openly as if you are bragging about it. Do you have no sense of shame? Sect leader Zhong, you should also know that there's a symbiotic relationship amongst the 6 sects. You stole Citadel Lord Bai's artifacts and his storage ring, and that can be viewed as an act of aggression. You are sullying the harmony amongst the 6 sects and possibly inciting a war even, Jiyu Zhueyun said deeply. What do you think we should do then? Zhongxian asked calmly. First and foremost, you should return everything you have taken from Citadel Lord Bai. Afterward, you should apologize to him, Jiyu Zhueyun said. Apologize? Zhongxian repeated before nodding slowly. Sounds fine by me too. After that, he waved his hand grandly. Who? The blackback tortoise immediately materialized before Zhongxian and charged right toward Bai Xiansheng. He was still wondering how he should broach the subject about the Evanescent Immortal sect and Black Mirror Citadel colluding with the Hall of Gods, but since the latter was the first one to pick a fight, there was no reason why he should shy away. What are you planning to do? Bai Xiansheng was stunned. It was just a moment ago that the other party said he was going to apologize, so why did the other party suddenly bring out the blackback tortoise? Well, I'm just reversing what has happened. I'll make sure to apologize to you properly if you survive this, Zhongxian chuckled softly. If I hadn't fallen for the blackback tortoise's trap, do you think that it would have been able to injure me given its prowess? Bai Xiansheng sneered. Raising his palm, he charged right toward the blackback tortoise once more. If not for the mayflies in the Sea of Little Mirror, there was no way he would have ended up getting cornered. Furthermore, the blackback tortoise was disadvantaged fighting on land. It would be a huge embarrassment if he couldn't win against it under such conditions. With a furious roar, wind currents raged around his palm strike. The blackback tortoise hadn't reverted back to its original body, so its current size was only roughly 2 meters long. The strength of its ram was significantly reduced due to its smaller size, but in exchange, it was able to move with greater agility. Take 3 steps in front and attack from your right, Zhongxian said. It had been many years since Bai Xiansheng had reached semi-divinity realm. Under normal circumstances, it would have been difficult for the blackback tortoise to triumph against him. However, it would be a different story when it had Zhongxian's guidance. In less than a minute, Bai Xuancheng's face was already swollen. His body was crushed under the massive tortoise shell, and he had multiple ribcage fractures. Sect leader Zhong, are you trying to start a fight over here? Jiyu Zhueyun couldn't bear watching by the side anymore. Isn't there already a fight over here? Do I even need to start one? Zhong Xian replied coldly. Since I'm returning the artifact to him, I think it's only fair for me to be able to retract my act of saving him too. Back then, Citadel Lord Bai was knocked out by the blackback tortoise when I stepped in to save him, and it doesn't seem like he's near there yet. Don't worry, I'll make sure how to interfere this time, or else you might just demand me to apologize to him again. Even if he passes away from this ordeal, you can be assured that I'll return the semi-divinity artifact back to the Black Mirror Citadel and apologize to him before his tombstone. Those words caused Bai Xuancheng to spurt a mouthful of fresh blood. What was the use of getting his semi-divinity artifact back after he was dead? You. Jiyu Zhueyun's face darkened. Do you think the consequences of killing the head of the Black Mirror Citadel? You are turning the entire Black Mirror Citadel against you. Turning them against me? Why would I do something like that? After Bai Xuancheng is dead, I'll head over to the Black Mirror Citadel and take over Bai Xuancheng's position. It happens that his sect leader token is in my hand too. In order to avoid any unnecessary conflicts, I'll send out the word that he has passed his seat down to me as well. Zhong Xian chuckled softly. As someone who cares so deeply about the peace of the world, I trust that sect leader Jiyu wouldn't expose me and risk plunging the world into chaos, right? When Zhong Xian took away Bai Xuancheng's storage ring back at the Sea of Little Mirror, the token of the Black Mirror Citadel was inside as well. He was intending to return it initially, but if Bai Xuancheng was really in collusion with the Hall of Gods, it would be a whole different story. As long as he had the sect leader token in his hand, it shouldn't be too difficult to convince others that Bai Xuancheng had passed down his position to him. He was already the head of the 4 sects anyway. He didn't mind bringing the Black Mirror Citadel under him as well. You. Jiyu Zhueyun didn't expect this young man to be so vicious. With narrowed eyes, he stepped forward to save Bai Xuancheng from the blackback tortoise, only to feel a chill running down his back in the next moment. Turning his head to the sides, he saw Han Zhenqiu, Kue Xiao, and Qin Yuan looking at him with a sharp look in their eyes. Sect leader Ji Yu, this is a personal affair between the two of them. I don't think that it's appropriate for an outsider like you to get involved. Knowing that the 3 of them really make a move on him if he were to interfere, Jiyu Zhueyun had no choice but to halt his footsteps. They were all semi-divinity realm cultivators, so there was no doubt that he would end up in the same state as Bai Xuancheng if he had to face the 3 of them simultaneously. Sect leader Zhong, save me. I was wrong. I won't ask you to apologize to me anymore. I don't want those treasures anymore. They are all yours. Seeing that he would really get killed by the blackback tortoise at this rate, the severely injured Bai Xuancheng cried out. He could tell that Zhong Xian really had no qualms about killing him and taking over his position as the Citadel Lord. If the latter were to succeed, he wouldn't suffer any backlash for his actions at all. You want me to save you? Zhong Xian looked at Bai Xuancheng with a conflicted look in his eyes. Well, I am only a heavenly high immortal realm cultivator. It would be really tough for me to fight against the semi-divinity realm blackback tortoise. Furthermore, I don't have anything to gain from this either. If you have anything of value to offer to me, perhaps I might still be able to consider doing so. You are still trying to rip me off. Bai Xuancheng was stunned for an instant before nearly bursting into tears. Is it really okay for a person to be so shameless? The blackback tortoise is already your tamed beast. All you have to do is to get it to stop, and you are still trying to ask me for rewards. Not to mention, you were the one who told it to attack me in the first place. If only I knew that you were such a shameless human, I would have never tried to get back my stuff in the first place. Chapter 2066 Descent of the Azure Bridge. 2 minutes later, Zhong Xian looked at the severely wounded Bai Xuancheng in satisfaction and said, Citadel Lord Bai, if you still want your things back, feel free to tell me. There's no need to stand on ceremony. Bai Xuancheng didn't even want to talk to Zhong Xian anymore. The other party extorted 3 whole Heavenly High Immortal Tier artifacts from him before finally signaling for the blackback tortoise to stop. If he were to dare continue asking for his artifacts back, wouldn't the cycle just repeat again? He had started this argument with the intention of using the harmony amongst the 6 sects to pressure the other party to return the semidivinity artifact that the other party had taken from him, but things ended up more awry than he could have imagined. Losing 3 Heavenly High Immortal Tier artifacts was just the least of his worries. What was more important was that he nearly lost his life. Citadel Lord Bai. After Zhongxian kept the blackback tortoise, Jiyu Zhueyun rushed forward to help Bai Shensheng up. "I'm fine," Bai Shensheng replied as he swallowed a pill and recuperated from his injuries. With gritted teeth, he sent a telepathic message over to Jiyu Zhueyun, "Let them relish in their glee for the time being. Once the Azure Bridge opens, we'll move according to plan. They'll eventually pay dearly for their actions." Jiyu Zhueyun nodded with a vicious glint in his eyes. Despite their subtle movements, the sharp-eyed Zhongxian still caught sight of their interaction and chuckled softly beneath his breath. Up till this point, he hadn't fully understood why the ethereal hall was intent on claiming the guardian artifacts of the 6 sects. However, one thing was for sure: Bai Shensheng and Jiyu Zhueyun were definitely not on their side. If anything, it was likely that they would become enemies with one another. Of course, despite the threats he had made, he knew that there would be a lot of implications if he were to kill one of the heads of the 6 sects without a valid reason. If things were to go wrong, it might even incite a war, and that was not what Zhongxian hoped to see. Thus, his intention was simply to teach Bai Shensheng a lesson and make use of this opportunity to force Bai Shensheng to reveal any trump cards he had. Fortunately, it didn't seem like the latter didn't have any semidivinity artifact other than the metal chain. Boom! All of a sudden, a deafening rumble echoed in the sky, heralding the arrival of a storm. The crowd raised their heads, only to see a massive bridge slowly descending from the pitch-black veil in the sky. "The Azure Bridge is descending," Han Zhenqiu muttered beneath his breath. The bridge was slowly extending down from the seemingly endless void above. It was made out of a marble-like material, emanating an icy-cold glint. Even as it was still in the midst of its descent, one could already feel its powerful presence. The crowd was forced to retreat to the edge of the heaven-anchoring boulder. The Azure Bridge descended onto the heaven-anchoring boulder and lodged itself onto it. As if a process that had been done many times before, the inscriptions on the heaven-anchoring boulder simply flickered for a while before eventually returning to calm. "The Azure Bridge will only remain connected for a single day. Sect leader Zhong, you should quickly head up," Han Zhenqiu urged. "Head up?" Zhongxian frowned. Even though it was termed as a bridge, it would be more accurate to describe it as a vertical pillar descending right from the sky. It was hard to imagine how one was supposed to walk on it. "You'll know once you try stepping on it," Han Zhenqiu replied as he ushered Zhongxian forward. Nodding slightly, Zhongxian beckoned Elder Hongwu and the others over before moving over to the Azure Bridge. The 2 geniuses from the Evanescent Immortal sect and the Black Mirror Citadel quickly followed suit too. Taking a deep breath, Zhongxian raised his foot and placed it on the bridge. His body couldn't help but stagger a little as the world around him disoriented a little. Before he knew it, the bridge was already right beneath his foot. He was standing right on top of it. When he turned his head around to take a look, he saw the heaven-anchoring boulder extending from the sides, perpendicular to where he was standing. It felt like Han Zhenqiu and the others were simply hanging off the heaven-anchoring boulder. It was a mysterious sight. "My center of gravity changed." Zhongxian was slightly taken aback. It was similar to how no matter where one was standing on the earth of his previous world, one would still feel as if one was standing upright due to the gravity pulling people inward into Earth's core. The fact that he was able to get a stable footing on the Azure Bridge despite it being perpendicular to the ground of the Forsaken Continent showed that the center of gravity had likely changed. Not only so, there was also a good chance that they had already stepped into another dimension, making them impervious to the Forsaken Continent's gravity. The others who stepped onto the Azure Bridge were also mystified by this different experience, and they couldn't help but assess their surroundings in wonderment. Nevertheless, knowing that their time was limited, they quickly proceeded forward. Before long, they were already completely swallowed by the darkness of the sky. It felt like there was no end in sight, and the only thing they could do was to continue making their way forward. A void where nothing existed, the area would have been deathly silent if not for the careful breathing coming from the group of 6. They knew that the warriors from the Hall of Gods could appear at any moment, so their bodies remained utterly tensed up. They didn't dare to let themselves get careless even for the briefest of moments. Who? All of a sudden, amidst the darkness, 5 fully armored silhouettes could be seen walking over from the opposite end of the Azure Bridge. They were all at heavenly high immortal realm. Only by defeating these warriors will we be able to proceed forward and claim the opportunity to reach semi-divinity realm. Elder Hong Wu muttered to himself as he clenched his fists in determination. At the same time, the others around him also narrowed their eyes as they examined the 5 warriors carefully. They had known the rules of the Azure Bridge in advance. 6 challengers against 5 warriors. Usually, 5 of the challengers would charge forward to hinder the 5 warriors, creating an opportunity for the final one to rush through. Sect leader Zhong will hold them back and create an opportunity for you to get through, Elder Hongwu said as he gathered his junchi. Sect leader Zhong will be counting on you. The other 2 nodded in agreement. Over the last few days, they had become filled with admiration for this young man. They were convinced that the young man would be the person who would bring the 4 sects to greater heights. Do whatever you want. We'll be going ahead first. While they were chatting with one another, the 2 geniuses from the Black Mirror Citadel and Evanescent Immortal sect charged ahead, arriving before the 5 warriors of the Hall of Gods in an instant. 2 of them walked forward to confront the 2 geniuses whereas the other 3 remained firmly on the spot, awaiting Zhongxian and the others to come over. Peng peng peng. There was a clear disparity of strength between the 2 geniuses and the 2 warriors of the Hall of Gods, but the 2 geniuses managed to stand their ground by making preemptive strikes. It was as if they knew what the 2 warriors were going to do in advance, allowing them to suppress the latter. Within 3 blows, they managed to push the 2 warriors back, forcing them to stagger several steps backward. Su. Making use of this momentary opening, the 2 geniuses quickly rushed through their blockade and escaped ahead. The 2 warriors fighting with them were about to chase them when one of the 2 geniuses said, "There are still 4 of them back there. If you were to chase us, you'll be giving them an opportunity to slip through the cracks." Upon hearing those words, the 2 warriors hesitated for a moment before returning back to their positions, waiting for Zhongxian and the others to make a move. Those 2 fellows. Not expecting to encounter such a situation, the faces of Elder Hongwu and the others darkened. The situation had just turned for the worst. From a 6 against 5, it had become a 4 against 5. Had he known that this would happen, he would have dashed forward with the 2 of them. We would have been in an even more vulnerable position if we had advanced together with them. They are aware of the flaws of the 5 warriors, so they could have found some ways to turn the warriors against us while we were fighting, Zhongxian remarked. It would be one thing if the 2 of them were trustworthy allies, but that was clearly not so. It would be dangerous to entrust your back to someone who could possibly turn against you at any moment. Sect leader Zhong, what should we do now? The genius from the Myriad Beasts Hall turned to Zhongxian and asked worriedly. Since they are able to charge their way through, there's no reason why we can't do so as well. Rest assured, just fight to the best of your ability. The warriors of the Hall of Gods aren't as scary as you think they are, Zhongxian said with a light chuckle. Of course, he could have defeated the 5 warriors of the Hall of Gods easily himself, but he wasn't going to do that. He knew very well that the Azure was just a temporary stop for him. Once he had a chance to enter the world of the gods, the firmament, he would definitely clinch that opportunity without any hesitation. That meant that he would have to pass down his current positions to others in the near future, and he had no intention of doing it sloppily. It would be the last thing he could do for these sects as their temporary head. In order to become the heads of their respective sects, these candidates would need to have absolute confidence in themselves. If they would cower in the face of the warriors of the Hall of Gods, how could they possibly take control of their own sect and bring it to greater heights in the future? This was not just a trial of their strength. If they could overcome this challenge, they would gain the confidence and credentials for them to lead others. We understand. Elder Hong Wu nodded before rushing toward one of the warriors. Ferocious wind currents blared deafeningly in the surroundings. Executing all of his battle techniques desperately, Elder Hong Wu surprisingly managed to gain the upper hand against the warriors of the Hall of Gods. The other two were slightly stunned by the sight. The techniques which Elder Hong Wu was executing were the ones that Zhong Xian had imparted to them previously. If Elder Hong Wu could stand his ground against them, the two of them surely stood a chance as well. With such thoughts in mind, they quickly rushed forward as well. As the start, their movements still felt a little awkward as they didn't have time to test out their newly acquired skills in a practical battle yet. However, as the battle continued on, their movements swiftly became more and more fluid. Even though sect leader Zhong has never told us the flaws of the warriors of the Hall of Gods before, the battle techniques which he has imparted to us somehow seem to suppress the maneuvers of the latter precisely. The trio was taken aback. Over the past few days, Zhong Xian had only imparted to them a couple of combat techniques. He told them to focus on building up their zhenqi instead of worrying about how they could deal with the warriors of the Hall of Gods. They couldn't really relate to it then, but at this very moment, they could finally see the rationale behind his actions. All of a sudden, the undefeatable warriors of the Hall of Gods didn't seem as frightening as they thought them out to be anymore. So I actually improved so much over the past few days. The three of them came to a realization. Had it been in the past, the warriors of the Hall of Gods would have likely been able to defeat them within 3 blows. The fact that they could stand on equal grounds with the warriors and even suppress them was unthinkable to them. They had been so focused on their cultivation that they hadn't realized how much they had grown. However, seeing the refined control over their zhenqi, the sharpness of their judgment in battle, and the swiftness of their reflexes, how could they possibly still remain oblivious to it? They were already no longer the same people as before. It's all thanks to sect leader Zhong, the trio thought. Such a change couldn't have come naturally. Without a doubt, Zhong Xian must have put a lot of thought into helping them grow. Furthermore, the fact that they were able to stand on par with these warriors of the Hall of Gods at the moment made it apparent to them that it wouldn't take much effort for Zhong Xian to subdue them too. They realized that Zhong Xian could have easily cleared the trial by himself, but he still spent time and effort trying to train them. It was clear that he was doing all of this for their growth. Only with the experience of overcoming the warriors of the Hall of Gods would they be able to go further as a semi-divinity realm cultivator. Let's defeat them together. Feeling a huge boost of confidence, the three of them executed their strongest moves simultaneously. Peng peng peng. With 3 dull thuds, the 3 warriors of the Hall of Gods were pushed back. Putong. 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 Several minutes later, the 3 warriors of the Hall of Gods slumped onto the floor, having breathed their last. Who? The trio heaved a sigh of relief at having accomplished what was expected of them. At this moment, they suddenly recalled that there were supposed to be 2 more warriors remaining, so they quickly turned their heads over in astonishment. However, what they saw was that the 2 warriors were also lying incapacitated on the floor, and Zhong Xian was looking at them not too far away from a faint smile. Even though Zhong Xian had made a move later than them, he had managed to defeat the other 2 faster than them. What was even scarier was that they didn't even see how he made a move. Well, the ones who felt that way weren't just them. Prior to their deaths, the 2 warriors of the Hall of Gods were also horrified. They didn't even manage to see what was coming at them when they had already been pushed down to the ground, awaiting the embrace of death. Chapter 2067 Slaying a Semi-Divinity. Let's go. Having dealt with the 5 warriors of the Hall of Gods who stood in their path, the group of 4 proceeded forward. The duo who had rushed ahead of them was nowhere to be seen at all. The azure bridge seemed to pierce through the endless darkness, extending beyond the horizon. They walked along the bridge for a while before there was finally a change in the sight ahead of them. A circular platform reminiscent of a gazebo gad appeared by the side of the azure bridge. The genius from the Black Mirror Citadel was seated at the center of the circular platform. A unique aura was rippling from the platform. The pores of the genius widened as he voraciously absorbed the unique aura, inducing a swift rise in his cultivation. It felt like he was already on the verge of a breakthrough. His pushing for a breakthrough to semi-divinity realm, Elder Hong Wu exclaimed. Based on the records of the predecessors, after overcoming the 5 warriors of the Hall of Gods, there would be various places atop the Azure Bridge where the challengers could attempt to achieve a breakthrough. As long as one was already at Heavenly High Immortal Realm, the chances of reaching Semi-Divinity Realm were extremely high. This circular platform was likely to be one of these places. Since this place has been taken up, let's move ahead to see if there are other circular platforms, Zhongxian said with a wave of his hand. He didn't have a good impression of these two, but he didn't think that there was a compelling reason for him to hinder them either. Since the predecessors of the 6 sects had been able to achieve a breakthrough on the Azure Bridge, there should be more of such circular platforms around as well. Otherwise, the genius from the Evanescent Immortal sect would have been here as well. Nodding in agreement, the group of 4 was just about to proceed ahead when a deep cry echoed behind them. A pillar of Zhenqi burst forth from the genius on the circular platform, rising right into the voids above. Boom! He has managed to achieve a breakthrough? Stunned, the crowd quickly turned around to take a look, only to see that the disposition of the middle-aged man had changed greatly. Divine energy was revolving around the surface of his body like a dragon coiling around him. He floated quietly atop the circular platform, as if he had been freed from the restraints of gravity. Who? Absorbing all of the energy into his body, the middle-aged man finally opened his eyes. A brilliant light shot out from his eyes. Feeling the explosive energy surging through his body, the lips of the middle-aged man curved up. His sight fell upon Zhongxian and the others, and a hint of surprise surfaced in his eyes. However, he quickly stood up and spoke. The fact that you are able to come this far means that you have been able to defeat the warriors of the Hall of Gods. However, this is where your good luck comes to an end. You won't be able to proceed any further than this. Su. In the next instant, he appeared right in front of the group. Seeing this, Zhongxian couldn't help but frown in displeasure. It would have been better if you have died in the hands of the warriors. It's meaningless if all of us were to successfully reach semi-divinity realm together. We would just be returning back to square one, the middle-aged man sneered coldly. The reason why they had unhesitatingly worked together with the Ethereal Hall was to ensure that their 2 sects would have a greater number of semi-divinity realm cultivators, thus putting them in a higher position than the rest of the 6 sects. However, if all of them were to succeed, wouldn't that render their efforts meaningless? So, you intend to kill us here? Zhongxian asked nonchalantly. He had known that these 2 sects were up to no good, but he hadn't really expected them to go this far. The middle-aged man replied coldly, casualties are almost guaranteed on the Azure Bridge. The world would only know of what happened here from the words of the survivors. Given the high death toll of the Azure Bridge, no one would be able to blame him if Zhongxian and the others died here. Even if Han Zhenqiu and the others were to harbor some suspicions, they wouldn't be able to do anything without concrete evidence unless they desired to incite a war. Seeing the confident look on the other party's face, Zhongxian couldn't help but burst into laughter. What makes you so certain that you are able to defeat us? I know that you have tamed the blackback tortoise, but the Azure Bridge is an existence created by a being that far surpasses our imagination. Do you think that you are able to bend the rules of the Azure Bridge so easily? The middle-aged man replied with a cold smile. If there were truly any loopholes in the Azure Bridge, our predecessors would have long uncovered it by now. Hearing those words, Zhongxian tried to extend his consciousness into his tamed beast sack, only to find that it had been sealed with some kind of mysterious power. He was unable to bring out the blackback tortoise and the others at all. However, he was still able to bring out the other heavenly high immortal tier beasts inside. It was just that the Azure Bridge was narrow, and the beasts he had were rather massive in sizes. If he were to summon them here, it would just hinder their movements. It seemed like the gods had thought things through before they constructed the Myriad Beasts Hall. They wouldn't allow anyone to sully the sanctity of this trial. Haven't you thought about why I was able to tame the blackback tortoise in the first place? I have no idea how a semi-divinity realm fledgling like you could possibly imagine that you would be able to kill me. Zhongxian shook his head and sighed deeply. He might have been unable to tap on the strength of the 4 semi-divinity realm beasts, but given his current cultivation realm, he was more than a match for a fellow who had just barely tiptoed his way into semi-divinity realm. What if I were to join the fight as well? At this very moment, another voice echoed from ahead. The genius from the evanescent immortal sect appeared at the other end, encircling the group. Similar to the genius from the Black Mirror Citadel, he had reached semi-divinity realm as well. With the two of them exerting their auras simultaneously, they cast a heavy pressure upon Elder Hongwu and the others, causing their faces to warp hideously. Zhong Xian might still have been able to defeat a single semi-divinity realm cultivator, but if he had to face 2 of them at once, the chances of victory were extremely slim. Furthermore, the 2 of them were top-notch geniuses on the Forsaken Continent. Even if they had just achieved a breakthrough, their strength was not to be underestimated. Aren't you worried about stirring a storm on the Forsaken Continent by making a move on us? Zhong Xian asked calmly. Don't worry. After you are dead, our Black Mirror Citadel and Evanescent Immortal sect will slowly annex your sects. Those so-called Starchaser Palace, Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, Myriad Beasts Hall, and 7-Star Pavilion, they would just become nothing more than relics of the past. With a cold harumph, the middle-aged man from the Black Mirror Citadel abruptly charged forward. He appeared right before Zhong Xian in an instant and thrust his palm forward. The middle-aged man's strength was as heavy as a crushing mountain. His might as a new semi-divinity realm cultivator poured forth like a relentless current. Elder Hongwu and the others wanted to help, but they felt as if their bodies had been bound by the pressure in the air, preventing them from taking a step at all. So, this is a semi-divinity realm cultivator? Elder Hongwu felt his heart sinking. He had met Elder Kuei Xiao many times before, but he had never seen the latter exerting his true prowess before, so he had no idea just how powerful semi-divinity realm cultivators were. It was only at this moment that it dawned upon him that it was impossible for a heavenly high immortal, no matter how powerful, to possibly reach up to a semi-divinity. That was also the reason why the presence of a semi-divinity realm cultivator in a sect was so important. In a direct confrontation, even if the 3 of them were to collaborate with one another, they wouldn't be able to last too long against the other party. Sect leader Zhong. Elder Hongwu anxiously turned to look at Zhong Xian, frightened that the hope of the 4 sects would really lose his life here. However, what he ended up seeing was a sight that he would never forget. The young man before him whipped out a sword, and without any hesitation, he pierced the sword right through the other party's palm. Puha! Puha! With 2 consecutive moves, the genius of the Black Mirror Citadel had been decapitated. At the point of his death, his eyes were completely dilated, as if he couldn't believe such a thing was truly happening. Isn't being alive a wonderful thing in itself? I really don't understand why you are so intent to seek death. Zhong Xian shook his head and sighed. His cultivation was only at heavenly high immortal realm, but his fighting prowess was on par with that of most semi-divinity realm cultivators. It might still take him a bit more trouble for him to deal with the semi-divinity realm experts of the Hall of Gods, but against this semi-divinity realm fledgling, it was really a walk in the park. You! The genius from the evanescent immortal sect would have never fathomed that he would see such a sight in his life either. Utterly horrified, he turned around and fled. He knew that he wouldn't be too much stronger than his comrade, and the fact that Zhong Xian was able to kill his comrade meant that the young man could do the same to him too. He had received orders in advance that if Zhong Xian was able to defeat the warriors of the Hall of Gods, they would have to make a move to kill the young man. He thought that it would have been an easy mission, but who could have thought that the person he was up against was an unbelievable monster? For a heavenly high immortal to actually be able to kill a semi-divinity with such ease. It would be no joke to say that the young man was as powerful as their own sect leader. Faced with such an opponent, what else could he possibly do other than to run? The reason why I took my time to ask you so many questions is to ascertain if you are really intending to kill me. Don't you think that it's too late for you to only think of running away now? Zhong Xian uttered those words softly under his breath, but due to the overwhelming silence in the area, his voice echoed clearly in the area. Wang. A sword pierced right forth swiftly and pierced right through the heart of the genius from the evanescent immortal sect. Puha! Just like that, The middle-aged man came to the end of his life as well. His body tumbled and crashed heavily onto the floor of the Azure Bridge. From the moment from their breakthroughs to their deaths, they didn't even last for 3 minutes. They were likely the most short-lived semidivinities on the Forsaken Continent. Chapter 2068. Entering the Hall of Gods, Zhongxian threw the bodies of the 2 semidivinities into his storage ring before gesturing for the stunned trio to proceed ahead with him. Not far away, another warrior of the Hall of Gods, also at the heavenly high immortal realm, appeared before them. After defeating him, another circular platform appeared before their eyes. Zhongxian turned to Elder Hongwu and said, "This is an opportunity to achieve a breakthrough to the semidivinity realm. You can take this one." "Thank you, sect leader Zhong." Elder Hongwu nodded in gratitude as he stepped onto the circular platform. Taking a seat, he swiftly began his cultivating. He could feel a unique aura inducing the energy in his body to billow, pushing him closer and closer to a breakthrough. Meanwhile, the remaining members of the group pressed on, and they soon found 2 more circular platforms. Those 2 circular platforms were each guarded by a warrior of the Hall of Gods, too. If it had been anyone else, they would have been unable to proceed, but that was not the case for Zhongxian's group. After slaying the warriors, Zhongxian beckoned for the 2 geniuses from the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion and the Myriad Beasts Hall to cultivate on the circular platform before advancing alone. He soon encountered another circular platform, and he headed up and sat down in the middle of the platform. Closing his eyes and focusing on his cultivation, he could feel a unique aura rippling in his surroundings. It was vastly different from the spiritual energy that he absorbed on the Forsaken Continent. His heavenly high immortal cultivation pulsated in response to this aura, seemingly expressing its desire to surge to new heights. "It's a pity that I haven't finished deducing a feasible semidivinity realm cultivation technique yet." Zhongxian sighed deeply with a shake of his head. He had spent days immersing his consciousness inside the great codex of spring and autumn, trying to come up with a semidivinity realm cultivation technique. However, he could not find something that was suited for him. He could choose to force his way through, and there was a good chance that he would succeed. However, if he did so for this major hurdle, it could lead to some complications that would hinder him from advancing any further in the future. Thus, he raised his hand and stuffed the aura suffusing the circular platform into a jade bottle before stashing it away in his storage ring. After entering the circular platform, he had become certain that this unique aura was the key to achieving a breakthrough to the semidivinity realm. It was similar what the Eon of Ancient Sage was to those attempting to make a breakthrough to Ancient Sage. With it, he would be able to push for a breakthrough as soon as he finished coming up with his cultivation technique. So, Zhongxian got off the circular platform and continued ahead. It seemed like there were quite a number of circular platforms along the Azure Bridge. It did not take long for him to stumble upon another. After dealing with the warrior guarding it, Zhongxian hesitated for a moment before bringing out his clone. A few moments later, his clone successfully made a breakthrough to the semidivinity realm. As he continued, the serpentine dragon, 9-headed fiery phoenix, and the others also successfully made breakthroughs. For the remaining circular platforms, he placed the heavenly high immortal tier swords that he had in there in order to nourish them. By doing so, there was a chance that they could become semidivinity artifacts. But where in the world is the Hall of Gods? At this rate, I won't be able to reach it within a single day. No matter how far he walked, the path ahead was still shrouded in darkness. He could not see the end of it. The Azure Bridge would only remain open for a single day. At this rate, he would not be able to snatch the _God_character. Those circular platforms could only be accessed via the Azure Bridge, which appeared once every century, but the God character was something that he could take back to the Forsaken Continent. If he could acquire it, the cultivators of the Forsaken Continent would be able to freely reach the semidivinity realm and even forge semi-divinity artifacts, just like the ethereal hall. They would no longer be restrained. It was just that he had some concerns. The Hall of Gods had expressed their desire to capture him, and they had even assaulted him numerous times before. Would he be walking into their trap by making his way over himself? The Azure Bridge only appears once every 100 years, and the Hall of Gods is likely to be the key to entering the firmament. No matter how dangerous it is, I have to take the risk. The next moment, he vanished from the spot. He had warped into a green streak, flitting forward at an unbelievable speed. Even if he could reach the semi-divinity realm, he was not confident that he could reach the Hall of Gods without the Azure Bridge. Thus, he could not afford to miss this opportunity. Before long, he reached a point where there were no longer any circular platforms in sight. It seemed like the number of circular platforms was limited. Only the front 2 circular platforms were unprotected, which basically meant that the Hall of Gods implicitly only allowed 2 candidates of the 6 sects to reach the semi-divinity realm. Beyond there, unless one was an expert on the same caliber as the founder of the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion or Kongsha, it would be impossible to get this far. For the past several thousand years, more often than not, only a single person of the 6 sects would manage to achieve a breakthrough. Yet, within this period of time, only a few dozen circular platforms had been formed. Of course, the thrifty Zhongxian made sure to take away all the unique aura contained in these circular platforms before forging ahead. All in all, while helping his tamed beasts achieve breakthroughs and gathering the unique aura within the other circular platforms, 6 hours had passed. If he did not hasten his footsteps, it would be impossible for him to enter the Hall of Gods. Driving his god's sword intent to the limits, Zhongxian was able to travel at a speed that far surpassed that of ordinary semi-divinity realm experts. But despite that, the Azure Bridge was simply too long. He flew for 6 hours straight after that, but the scenery remained unchanged. This is impossible. If the Hall of Gods is truly that far away, how can anyone enter and return from the Hall of Gods within a day? Zhongxian shook his head in disbelief. All in all, he had been traveling for 12 hours, but the end was nowhere in sight. Was it impossible for him to reach the Hall of Gods with his current strength? Based on the records, if one did not return to the heaven-anchoring boulder before the Azure Bridge disappeared, one would fall into the dimension rifts, where even semi-divinity realm cultivators would be unable to survive. I'll just fly for another 2 hours. Zhongxian gritted his teeth. He did not rush at full speed for the first 6 hours, so if he immediately turned back, it would take roughly 8 hours for him to return to the heaven-anchoring boulder, which meant that he only had 2 more hours to play with. If he still could not find the Hall of Gods within the next 2 hours, he would have to return. Thus, driving his Zhongxi to the limits, Zhongxian sped up further and rushed ahead. An hour later, there were finally some changes at the very end of the Azure Bridge. Amid the dark void, he could vaguely see a massive castle. Heaving a sigh of relief, Zhongxian could not help but murmur, "It sure is far away." The fact that the founder of the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion and Kongsha were able to reach the Hall of Gods means that they were no weaker than me when they challenged the Azure Bridge. For someone who possessed superior cultivation and had comprehended the god's sword intent to have to fly for more than 12 hours in order to reach the Hall of Gods, the length of the Azure Bridge was truly fearful. Since Kongsha and the founder of the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion had been able to successfully snatch a character from the Hall of Gods, they must have gone through the same path. Given so, they must have been extremely powerful individuals. The massive castle floated quietly in the air, serving as a backdrop to the dark void. It took Zhongxian roughly 15 minutes to arrive at its entrance. Jia. Sensing the arrival of a living being, the doors of the castle slowly creaked open. Knowing that there was no time to lose, Zhongxian quickly made his way in. Shortly after he entered, the doors behind him closed, plunging him into darkness. Following which, innumerable torches lit up, illuminating the surroundings. Hoo. 10 silhouettes appeared in the area simultaneously. Their auras felt steady yet unfathomable, making it impossible to gauge the depths of their cultivation. They were all semi-divinity realm experts. The Hall of Gods was indeed a formidable entity. It was rare to meet even a single semi-divinity out on the Forsaken Continent, yet 10 of them had appeared simultaneously. You sure are bold, Zhongxian. You knew that the Hall of Gods intends to capture you, but you still had the guts to walk here of your own accord. There was a towering figure seated on the throne at the very center. The position he sat at was even higher than where the torches could illuminate, resulting in his face being cloaked in shadows. His voice was ice-cold, seemingly devoid of feelings. Zhongxian had expected to encounter such a situation right from the start, so he was not taken aback at all. Instead, he looked at the silhouette seated on the throne and said with a frown, "The Forsaken Continent is full of talented individuals. I'm curious as to why you are biting onto me like determined dogs. Is it really because of the god's sword intent?" He had made sure to maintain a low profile ever since he arrived at the Forsaken Continent, but he had still been assaulted thrice. He really could not understand the intentions of the Hall of Gods. God's sword intent, the silhouette on the throne scoffed coldly. Just that thing isn't worthy of prompting the Hall of Gods into action. What are you up to? Zhongxian asked with a deep frown. Despite the crackling of flames from the torch, the surroundings felt incredibly cold and lifeless. You are from the Master-Teacher Continent, aren't you? The silhouette asked. You know of the Master-Teacher Continent? Zhongxian was shocked. Without bothering to respond to Zhongxian's question, the silhouette waved his hand and said, I want him alive. Huala. The 10 semi-divinity realm warriors immediately charged forward and encircled Zhongxian. It won't be that easy for you to capture me, Zhongxian replied coldly. Since he dared step into the Hall of Gods, he was prepared to face the dangers in there. Who? He brought out the corpses of the 2 semi-divinity realm cultivators from the Azure Bridge. Boom! In an instant, the 2 bodies exploded simultaneously. On his way there, he had forged the 2 into soulless metal humanoids. Humph! But before the shockwaves of the explosion could ripple outward, a cold harumph echoed. Right after, a burst of light flickered through the interior of the Hall of Gods, binding the power of the explosion. With a light pop, the explosion dissipated on the spot. Zhongxian's face darkened. He had thought that the explosions of the 2 semi-divinities would at least buy him some time, but it seemed like there was a formidable defensive formation around the Hall of Gods. It was actually able to completely neutralize the force of the explosion. This won't do. I need to escape. Zhongxian took out the Tongzhang sword and channeled his god's sword intent toward the tightly sealed door of the Hall of Gods, intent on knocking it down. The Tongzhang sword was an existence that was only a step away from reaching the semi-divinity realm. On his way there, he had already made use of the unique aura from the circular platform to help it achieve a breakthrough, making it far stronger than before. When used together with his god's sword intent, the might that he commanded would be able to slay ordinary semi-divinity realm cultivators within a single strike. Ding ding ding! But as the sword chi fell on the door, a metallic clang echoed in the air. Astoundingly, not even a scratch was left on the door. Is the door a semi-divinity artifact as well? Zhongxian could hardly believe his eyes. The might that he had exerted was enough to overpower even Han Zhenqiu in an instant. Yet, despite facing such an attack, the door remained completely unharmed. Its tier was far beyond his imagination. Futile. Having expected such an outcome, the 10 semi-divinities chuckled as they rushed forward simultaneously. A massive net made of zhenqi fell from the sky, sealing all possible routes of escape for Zhongxian. Shatter. Zhongxian brandished his sword, releasing a barrage of sword qi toward the massive net. However, the sword qi did nothing to stop the massive net. It was as if they were existences of 2 different planes. The massive net simply passed right through the sword qi and bound Zhongxian's body tightly. At the same time, Zhongxian sensed that his zhenqi had been sealed, preventing him from exerting his strength. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.